What if I told you that some of the deepest secrets of the human heart weren't hidden in love letters or poems, but in legal documents, that for thousands of years, across civilizations and continents, people were writing love into law, making emotional promises as binding as any business deal? We often picture history as a time of cold arrangements, political marriages, and practical partnerships. But what if that's only half the story? What if, etched into clay tablets, inked onto papyrus, and sealed within medieval parchments, there lies proof that love was not just felt, but formally recognized, protected, and even required by ancient societies? Today, we're uncovering 29 extraordinary contracts that reveal more about love than law agreements, where "cherish her heart" appears alongside property rights, where joy was a clause and emotional neglect carried real consequences. From a Sumerian vow of mutual support written over 4,000 years ago to a Victorian marriage settlement that regulated affection within bounds of propriety, these documents pull back the curtain on how our ancestors understood commitment, care, and connection. They show us that love wasn't an afterthought. It was built into the architecture of daily life, recognized by judges, witnessed by communities, and treated with a seriousness that might just surprise you. So get ready to journey into the intimate legal landscapes of ancient Babylon, Rome, India, and beyond, where a husband could be fined for failing to listen to his wife's heart, where couples were contractually obliged to compose poetry for one another, and where emotional loyalty was as enforceable as financial debt. This is more than history, it's a rediscovery of love's lasting power, documented in some of humanity's oldest writings. By the end of this video, you may never look at relationships or the law the same way again. Long before the concept of a signature even existed, ancient societies were already mastering the art of the agreement. Imagine the bustling marketplaces of Mesopotamia or the administrative halls of ancient Egypt. These were places where the future was secured not with a handshake, but with a meticulously crafted contract. These documents were the backbone of civilization, formalizing everything from the sale of a parcel of land to the complex terms of a business partnership. But their purpose extended far beyond simple record-keeping. They were a mirror held up to society, reflecting its deepest values, its religious convictions, and its most cherished social structures. A contract was never just a list of obligations. It was a cultural artifact. The language used, the witnesses called, the very materials it was written on, whether impressed into a clay tablet with a stylus or carefully inked onto papyrus, all of it spoke volumes about what that civilization held dear. In a world without mass communication, these contracts were a powerful tool for reinforcing societal norms. They dictated the roles of husbands and wives, the responsibilities of children to their parents, and the expectations between masters and servants. They were, in essence, the operating manual for daily life, ensuring that everyone understood their place and their duties within the community. This is why the legal frameworks of the ancient world are so fascinating to explore. They weren't the cold, impersonal systems we might imagine. They were deeply interwoven with spirituality and morality. An oath sworn on the name of a god was not taken lightly. To break a contract was often to offend the divine order itself. This sacred dimension elevated these agreements from mere transactions to covenants, binding people not only to each other but to a higher power. The law was not separate from life. It was the framework that gave life stability and meaning. And within this vast landscape of legal documents, from bills of sale to peace treaties, the contracts that govern personal relationships are perhaps the most revealing. They show us where the rigid lines of the law encountered the soft, unpredictable terrain of the human heart. In most cases, marriage agreements and dowry contracts were pragmatic affairs, concerned with property, inheritance, and social alliances. They were about building stable households and ensuring economic survival. But every so often we find something extraordinary, a clause that breaks the mold, a phrase that speaks not to the purse but to the soul. These are the documents that transcend their time, where the scribe's hand seems to have paused, allowing a glimpse of genuine care, respect, or even love to seep into the formal text. This rich and complex background is essential for understanding why the 29 contracts we are about to explore are so revolutionary. They stand out precisely because they dared to prioritize emotional depth in a world often dominated by cold practicality. They are the exceptions that prove a profound rule, that even in the most rigid legal systems, the human desire for emotional connection, for recognized and protected affection, could not be entirely suppressed. These documents whisper to us across the centuries that love was never truly a private affair. It was a powerful, documentable force that our ancestors sought to capture, protect, and preserve within the very laws that structured their world. Now let's travel to the very cradle of civilization itself, to ancient Mesopotamia, where some of the world's first known laws were written into existence. Here, marriage was far more than a simple agreement between two people. It was a sophisticated legal institution, a carefully constructed pact designed to ensure stability, prosperity, and remarkably, emotional harmony. These weren't vague promises whispered at an altar. They were detailed contracts, often etched into damp clay tablets with a stylus, outlining responsibilities with a precision that would impress any modern lawyer. They covered everything from the wife's dowry, which could include anything from silver and barley to land and enslaved individuals, to the inheritance rights of any future children. The financial and social mechanics were laid out with crystal clarity, but then we find something that truly makes us pause and reconsider everything we thought we knew about ancient partnerships. Take, for instance, a specific contract from the city of Babylon, dating all the way back to around 1800 BCE. Amidst the expected clauses about property and assets, there appears a profoundly human stipulation. It commands that the husband must provide not only material support but emotional sustenance as well. The contract uses phrases like, "He shall cherish her heart," and "He shall bring joy to her spirit," legally binding the man to tend to his wife's emotional well-being. This was not a suggestion, it was a requirement, as much a part of the deal as the transfer of goods. And what's even more astonishing is that this contract wasn't just full of lofty ideals, it had teeth. It outlined real, enforceable penalties for a husband who failed in this duty of heartfelt care. If he was found to be emotionally neglectful, if he caused her persistent sorrow or abandoned his role as a companion, the wife, or often her family, had legal recourse. She could potentially leave the marriage and reclaim her dowry, a significant financial and social consequence for the husband. This transforms the entire document. It elevates it from a cold transaction to a covenant of mutual respect, recognizing that a successful marriage required an investment in the soul, not just the household. This reveals a Mesopotamian worldview that is beautifully nuanced. They saw no contradiction between the practical and the emotional. A strong household required both a full storeroom and a light heart. The husband's duty was dual in nature, to be both a provider and a partner. This contract suggests they understood that economic security alone could not forge a lasting bond. It had to be paired with affection and respect. It sets a powerful precedent, showing us that even at the dawn of recorded history, in a society we often imagine as harsh and rigid, there was a conscious effort to legally acknowledge the invisible, fragile, yet essential threads of human connection. This early blueprint for marriage, blending law with love, offers a stunningly modern perspective from the ancient world. While the Babylonians were carving emotional care into their clay tablets, another ancient civilization was weaving love into the very fabric of their culture in a way that was both lyrical and legally binding. The ancient Egyptians are renowned for their breathtaking love poetry, passionate verses where a lover might be compared to the mistress of my heart or a gazelle graceful in step. We often picture these poems as private, intimate exchanges, whispered away from the public eye. But what's truly fascinating is how these same romantic ideals didn't just stay on the papyrus scrolls of poets. They found their way directly into the formal, legal documents that governed marriage and family life. This creates a stunning cultural paradox. Here was a society that built monuments to eternity with mathematical precision, yet they also understood that a successful human relationship required something more than just cold calculation. They saw no divide between the heart and the law. A surviving marriage contract from the New Kingdom period, around 1550 to 1070 BC, offers a perfect example. Alongside the expected lists of property and material goods the wife brought into the marriage, we find a clause that is startling in its emotional clarity. It legally required the husband to not only provide food, shelter, and clothing, but also to ensure he brought joy to the heart of his wife. This wasn't a vague suggestion, it was a contractual obligation. Her happiness was deemed as essential to the marriage as any physical asset, and its neglect could potentially have consequences. Sometimes, the blending of art and law was even more direct. Certain legal agreements would actually quote or paraphrase lines from famous love poems, embedding promises of eternal devotion and unwavering loyalty into the dry text of a binding contract. Imagine a document that starts with the practicalities of inheriting a plot of land by the Nile, but then includes a vow for the husband to be her servant for all eternity, a phrase lifted straight from a popular romantic verse of the time. This blurred the line completely between a legal duty and a heartfelt promise. It transformed the contract from a simple record of a transaction into a sacred covenant, a promise made not just before witnesses and officials, but before the gods themselves. This profound integration tells us something incredible about Egyptian values. They believed that emotional fulfillment and economic stability were two sides of the same coin, both absolutely necessary for a harmonious and prosperous household, or what they called per ankh, the house of life. A marriage could not thrive on grain and linen alone. It needed laughter, respect, and genuine affection to truly flourish. The law, in their view, was a tool to protect and nurture this complete picture of well-being. By legally enforcing happiness, they were acknowledging that love was an active verb, something that required daily effort and was worthy of the same formal recognition as any other crucial component of a partnership. This Egyptian model of blending poetic romance with legal responsibility shows a sophisticated understanding of human nature that would echo through the ages, influencing the relationships of empires yet to come. When we think of ancient Rome, we often picture a world of stern senators, unyielding laws, and marriages arranged for political gain, a society where practicality always trumped emotion. And in many ways, the Roman dowry agreement, or DOS, fits this mold perfectly. It was primarily a financial instrument, a transfer of wealth from the bride's family to the groom's household, designed to cover the expenses of married life and secure the wife's future. The law meticulously detailed every aspect: how the dowry was to be managed, what happened to it if the wife died, and the exact terms for its return if the marriage ended in divorce. It was a contract built on cold, hard calculus, reflecting the Roman ideal of the paterfamilias, the male head of household, as a rational manager of assets. This was the bedrock of Roman marital law, a system famed for its rigidity and order. But then we stumble upon a document that shatters this entire stereotype. A specific marriage contract from the 2nd century CE, discovered among the personal archives of a well-to-do family, contains a clause so extraordinary it forces us to rewrite the story. Amidst the standard legal jargon about property and payments, it includes a simple but revolutionary condition. It stipulates that the husband must provide affectionate care, using the Latin phrase diligentia caritatis, which implies a tender, loving attentiveness. This was not a vague suggestion, it was a legally binding term. The contract explicitly stated that if the husband was found to be lacking in this affectionate care, if he was cold, neglectful, or caused his wife emotional distress, she had the right to initiate divorce and, most importantly, to reclaim her full dowry in its entirety. This single clause changes everything. In a legal system where a woman's property rights were often limited, this gave her a powerful tool. Her emotional well-being was no longer a private matter. It was a public, legally enforceable condition of the marriage contract. A wife, or more likely her male relatives acting on her behalf, could literally take her husband to court and argue that he had failed in his duty of emotional care. They could present evidence of his neglect, and if successful, the financial penalty for the husband was severe. He would lose the dowry, a significant economic blow that also carried a heavy social stigma, marking him as a man who could not even fulfill the basic emotional requirements of a husband. This transformed love from a fleeting feeling into a measurable, actionable legal standard. What does this tell us about the Romans? It reveals a layer of nuance we often overlook. While their society was built on a foundation of law and order, the best legal minds of the era, jurists like Ulpian and Gaius, understood that a successful marriage required more than just financial cohabitation. It required concordia, or harmony. They recognized that emotional neglect could destroy a household just as effectively as financial ruin. This contract shows that at least some Romans believed the law should protect the heart as well as the purse, acknowledging that love and affectionate partnership were not frivolous extras but integral components of a stable and productive union. This surprising emphasis on emotional accountability within one of history's most pragmatic empires perfectly sets the stage for the even more intimate and detailed contracts we are about to uncover from other ancient cultures. Now let's meet Ur-Shara and Nin-Kola, a couple living in the Sumerian city of Ur over 4,000 years ago. Their names and the remarkable agreement they made have survived not through legend or song, but because it was carefully impressed into a damp clay tablet that later hardened and was preserved for millennia. This isn't a grand royal decree or an epic poem. It's a deeply personal document, a marriage contract that offers us an incredibly intimate window into their lives and their values. What makes this particular tablet so extraordinary and worthy of being our first contract is that it moves decisively beyond the standard business of marriage. Yes, it dutifully records the practicalities, the allocation of land they would farm together, the management of their domestic assets, the division of daily chores. These were the essential pillars of survival in the ancient world, the non-negotiable foundations of any household. But then, the scribe's stylus carved out clauses that resonate with a stunningly modern understanding of partnership. The contract explicitly requires both Ur-Shara and Nin-Kola to provide comfort in times of sorrow and to actively create joy in times of celebration. Think about the profound implications of that. In a world of immense hardship where famine, disease, and conflict were constant threats, this couple, and the society that legally endorsed their agreement, recognized that emotional support was not a luxury. It was a necessity as vital to the health of their marriage as a good harvest was to their physical survival. This wasn't a vague hope or a religious ideal. It was a mutually binding, legally enforceable obligation. They were contractually bound to be each other's emotional sanctuary. This transforms our understanding of their relationship. It reveals a concept of love that is active and demonstrative. Love, in their view, was not a passive feeling that simply existed, but a daily practice that required conscious effort and specific actions. It was the duty to notice a partner's sadness and to actively offer solace. It was the responsibility to not just participate in community festivals, but to ensure your spouse experienced genuine delight and shared happiness within them. Their contract legally codified empathy, making emotional attunement a core job description for both husband and wife. This level of mutual obligation, where both parties are equally responsible for the psychological climate of their marriage, is something many modern couples still strive to achieve. The contract of Urshara and Nin Kola is therefore so much more than a historical curiosity. It is a foundational document in the history of human relationships. It stands as powerful, tangible proof that even at the dawn of civilization, in one of humanity's very first complex societies, people understood that a true partnership was a holistic endeavor. It required tending to the spirit as diligently as one tended to the field or the hearth. This Sumerian vow establishes a baseline, showing us just how deep our historical roots of emotional partnership truly go, and it perfectly paves the way for the next contract we will examine, which takes this idea of enforceable emotional care and gives it even sharper legal teeth. Just a few centuries after Urshara and Nin Kola made their vows in Sumer, the concept of legally mandated emotional care evolved in a fascinating and more precise direction. We now travel to the great city of Babylon, the beating heart of a vast empire known for its sophisticated and often harsh legal codes. It's here, around 1750 BCE, that we find our second contract, an agreement that takes the principle of heartfelt duty and gives it remarkable legal power and specificity. This wasn't a contract between just any couple. It involved a merchant, a man whose life was likely filled with the complexities of trade, travel, and commerce. And his wife, whose name history has unfortunately not preserved with the same clarity, was about to receive a level of emotional protection that feels astonishingly modern. The contract itself covered all the standard financial ground you would expect. It detailed the wife's dowry, outlined provisions for her support, and established what would happen to their property under various circumstances. But then, nestled among these conventional clauses, appears a phrase that stops historians in their tracks. It legally obligated the husband to, and I'm translating the essence here, listen to her heart's words. This is a breathtakingly intimate demand. It moves beyond the general promise of comfort and joy we saw in Sumer and zeroes in on the very mechanics of empathy and communication. He wasn't just required to be generically kind, he was contractually bound to actively listen, to seek to understand her emotional state, and crucially, to act upon what he heard. Her inner life, her heart's words, were not a private mystery but a matter of legal concern, and this was not merely a suggestion, it was an enforceable term with very real teeth. The contract stipulated clear financial penalties for neglect. If the wife could demonstrate to authorities or elders that her husband was failing in this duty, that he was emotionally absent or dismissive of her needs, he could be fined. In some interpretations, repeated neglect could even empower her to initiate a separation while retaining significant financial rights. This transformed a woman's happiness from an abstract ideal into a tangible, legally protected asset. Her emotional well-being had a value that could be measured in silver or barley, making it a serious component of the household's economy. This was a radical notion that emotional abandonment constituted a real and quantifiable harm. What makes this so remarkable is the context. Babylonian society, under the famous Code of Hammurabi, was intensely patriarchal. Women were largely under the authority of their fathers or husbands. Yet within this rigid structure, the legal system occasionally allowed for these surprising intersections with concepts of empathy and mutual respect. This contract suggests that Babylonian thinkers understood love, or at least successful partnership, as a dynamic and active force. It wasn't a static condition you achieved and then forgot about. It was an ongoing process of attentive listening and responsive action that required continuous effort. The law, in this instance, was used not to suppress emotion but to safeguard the conditions that allowed it to flourish. This pact sets a powerful precedent. It reveals that even in societies we perceive as overwhelmingly focused on male authority, there were mechanisms, however rare, that acknowledged a woman's right to emotional fulfillment within marriage. It granted her a voice and a form of recourse, treating her heart not as a trivial concern but as a vital component of a stable and lawful union. This Babylonian merchant's contract, therefore, is far more than a list of rules. It is a profound early experiment in using the force of law to protect the fragile, essential architecture of human connection, an idea that would continue to evolve in extraordinary ways across the ancient world. Leaving the sun-baked plains of Babylon, our journey now takes us north into the rugged highlands of ancient Anatolia, the heartland of the Hittite Empire. This was a formidable Bronze Age power, a kingdom of warrior kings and intricate legal codes known for their unyielding treaties and strict hierarchies. It's within this context of formidable structure that we discover our third contract, a Hittite marriage agreement from around 1400 BC that introduces a powerful new dimension to our story, the legal requirement of emotional loyalty. This document moves beyond promises of care and attentive listening, demanding something even more profound, a steadfastness of the heart. The contract itself was a serious affair, often sealed with oaths sworn to the Hittite pantheon of gods, making its breach not just a legal offense but a spiritual transgression. Amidst the expected terms regarding property and social status, we find a clause that is both beautiful and legally precise. It required both spouses to swear not only physical fidelity, which was common, but also a vow of steadfastness of heart. This phrase, etched into clay tablets, is a stunning piece of legal poetry. It legally bound each partner to emotional constancy, to a reliable and unwavering emotional presence. It was a promise to not let one's affection wander, to not become cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. In a world where marriages were often strategic, this clause sought to protect the emotional core of the relationship itself. The signing of this contract was not merely an administrative act, it was a ritual filled with symbolic meaning. Historical evidence suggests that as part of the ceremony, couples would exchange vows aloud, promising to hold each other's spirits high. Imagine the scene, a couple, surrounded by family, priests, and legal witnesses, reciting these words that blended the language of the law with the imagery of poetry. They weren't just signing a document, they were performing a public commitment to become emotional guardians for one another. This ritualistic aspect elevated the contract from a simple set of rules to a sacred covenant, embedding the promise of emotional loyalty into the very fabric of their social and religious community. And the consequences for breaking this vow were severe. A breach of this emotional loyalty was not seen as a minor personal slight. It was treated with a seriousness on par with a material Chinese letter, like failing to deliver a promised payment or property. A spouse who could prove they had been subjected to sustained emotional neglect or coldness, a falling spirit as the contract might phrase it, could bring a case before the authorities. The penalties could range from significant fines paid to the wronged party to, in extreme cases, a dissolution of the marriage with terms favorable to the emotionally abandoned partner. This legal framework reveals a Hittite belief that emotional betrayal could shatter a household's harmony just as completely as financial deceit, and therefore deserved the same level of legal scrutiny and consequence. This Hittite contract offers us a fascinating glimpse into the institutionalization of love within a Bronze Age society. It shows that the Hittites viewed love not as a fleeting or passive emotion that simply happened to people, but as an active, daily commitment, a conscious choice to remain emotionally present and loyal. It was a discipline, something to be practiced and upheld, with its neglect considered a serious failure of one's sworn duties. This concept of love as a verb, as a form of loyal action, reverberates with surprising force across the centuries, echoing forward into philosophies and relationship ideals we still grapple with today. It proves that the human desire to secure not just the body but the heart in a binding promise is an ancient and enduring pursuit. Now we venture into the world of the Assyrians, a civilization often remembered for its formidable military might and strict hierarchical laws. In the shadow of their great palaces and warrior kings, we find a contract that seems to defy the stern reputation of the empire. Dating back to 1200 BC, this agreement was between a high-ranking military officer and his wife, and it contains a clause so unexpectedly warm that it forever changes our perception of Assyrian domestic life. While the document begins predictably, outlining the husband's duties to provide protection and material security, it then pivots to something far more profound. It legally obligates the couple to actively create happiness together, transforming joy from a hopeful byproduct of marriage into a mandated, collaborative project. This wasn't a vague, aspirational statement. The contract got remarkably specific about how this shared happiness was to be achieved. It explicitly earmarked a portion of the household's resources, a specific amount of silver, barley, and wine, to be set aside solely for the purpose of funding joyous occasions. This allocated treasure wasn't for practical expenses or savings. It was a legally protected budget for festivity. The contract listed approved activities, hosting feasts for their friends and family, attending public festivals in the city, and even financing small, private celebrations for just the two of them. The husband was not merely encouraged to pay for these things, he was legally required to do so and to ensure his wife was not just present, but an active and enthusiastic participant in the merriment. Her joy was formally recognized as a collective responsibility, a necessary ingredient for the health of the marriage that demanded intentional investment. This reveals an Assyrian philosophy of marriage that is beautifully sophisticated. They understood that a strong union couldn't be built on duty and security alone. It required a foundation of positive, shared experiences. In the demanding life of a military officer, with its long campaigns and periods of absence, this clause served a vital purpose. It legally enforced reconnection, ensuring the couple would regularly dedicate time to rebuild their bond through laughter, celebration, and communal joy upon his return. It treated the emotional climate of the home with the same seriousness as its physical defense. What we would today call quality time or date night was, for this Assyrian couple, a non-negotiable contractual obligation, as binding as any vow of fidelity. The profound insight here is the recognition that joy isn't always spontaneous. Often, it must be cultivated. The Assyrians, through this legal framework, acknowledged that in the grind of daily life, happiness requires intentionality, planning, and even financial commitment. By encoding it into a contract, they gave it structure and priority, protecting it from being endlessly postponed or overlooked for more practical concerns. This pact of shared joy stands as a stunning example of how ancient law could be used to safeguard the very things that make life worth living, proving that even in a warrior culture, the heart's need for celebration was understood, valued, and deemed worthy of the law's strongest protections. From the disciplined world of the Assyrians, we now sail across the Mediterranean to the vibrant, merchant-driven civilization of the Phoenicians. Around 1000 BCE, in one of their bustling coastal cities in what is now modern-day Lebanon, a different kind of agreement was being drawn up. This contract, our fifth, reveals a society that viewed the home not just as a place of residence, but as an emotional ecosystem to be carefully cultivated and legally protected. It's known as the Pact of Heart and Home, and its opening phrase sets a beautiful tone for everything that follows. It charges the couple with the duty to build a home of laughter and respect. This is far more than a hopeful blessing. It is a legally binding job description for both husband and wife, making the emotional atmosphere of their domestic life a formal, shared responsibility. What makes this Phoenician document so extraordinary is its remarkable foresight and psychological insight. The contract's authors understood that a home filled with laughter and respect doesn't happen by accident, especially when two people with different perspectives and needs share a life together. Conflict is inevitable, but where many ancient legal systems might have simply granted the husband ultimate authority to settle disputes, this Phoenician pact takes a radically different approach. It includes meticulously detailed provisions for conflict resolution, mandating in clear language that any disagreements between the spouses must be settled with, and I quote, kind words and patient hearts. This clause legally requires a specific emotional discipline during arguments. It bans harsh language, shouting, or imperious commands, forcing a pause for cooling off and compassionate communication. Imagine the practical impact of such a rule. A couple having a heated debate over finances or family matters couldn't just resort to force or fury. The contract they had both sworn to uphold demanded they take a breath, lower their voices, and choose their words with kindness and a goal of mutual understanding. This transforms the home from a potential battlefield into a sanctuary for reasoned, respectful dialogue. It legally enshrines the idea that how you fight matters just as much as what you fight about, and that winning an argument at the expense of your partner's dignity was a violation of their sworn vows. This represents a breathtakingly sophisticated understanding of relational health for its time. This focus on emotional harmony reveals the core Phoenician value system. As a people famed for their seafaring trade and intricate networks of commerce, they were master pragmatists. They understood that a household fractured by constant conflict and resentment was an unstable one, and instability was bad for business. A happy home was a productive home, a place where both partners could thrive and contribute to the family's prosperity. They saw love and respect not as abstract romantic ideals, but as the essential, practical glue that held the entire domestic enterprise together. Emotional well-being was directly linked to economic and social stability, and was therefore worthy of the most serious legal protections available. This contract, discovered on a fragment of papyrus, is a powerful testament to the nuanced ways ancient legal systems could address the complexities of the human heart. It shows that the Phoenicians, for all their commercial genius, possessed a deep wisdom about what truly makes a partnership work on a day-to-day basis. They recognize that the greatest threats to a marriage aren't always grand betrayals, but the slow erosion caused by daily rudeness, impatience, and unkind words. By legally mandating kindness and patience, they were proactively defending against this erosion, building a legal moat around the emotional safety of their homes. This early, clear-eyed recognition of love's foundational role in the minutiae of daily life perfectly sets the stage for the next contract in our journey, which will explore how this idea of love as a sacred duty was formalized within a deeply spiritual tradition. Moving from the pragmatic shores of Phoenicia, we arrive at a tradition where the legal, the spiritual, and the emotional are woven together into one of the most enduring and meaningful documents in human history. In ancient Israel, the marriage contract known as the Ketuba was far more than a simple financial agreement. It was a sacred covenant, a public declaration of a man's responsibilities that extended deep into the realm of the heart. While its primary function was to provide a Jewish wife with profound financial protection, guaranteeing her support and a settlement in case of divorce or widowhood, a revolutionary concept for its time, many versions of this document went much further. They wove threads of emotional and spiritual obligation directly into its legal fabric. One such Ketuba, dating back to around 500 BC, includes a clause that is as beautiful as it is binding. It requires the husband to not only provide for his wife's material needs, but to actively nourish her soul with kindness. Let's sit with that phrase for a moment. To nourish implies a sustained, nurturing action like tending a garden. The soul points to her innermost being, her emotional and spiritual core. And kindness, or the Hebrew concept of chesed, means a loving kindness that is active, generous, and goes far beyond mere politeness. This wasn't a hopeful piece of poetry added for decoration. This was a legally sworn oath. He was contractually bound to be the source of her emotional sustenance, to actively contribute to her inner well-being with his words, his actions, and his daily demeanor. What makes the enforcement of this clause so fascinating is the role of the community. This wasn't a private matter to be hashed out behind closed doors. The Ketuba was a public document, read aloud at the wedding ceremony and witnessed by the entire community. This created a powerful system of social oversight. If a husband was consistently harsh, cold, or emotionally neglectful, his wife wasn't without recourse. She, or more often her family, could bring the matter before the community elders or the local rabbinical court. They could point to the Ketuba and argue that he was failing in his sworn duty to provide soul nourishment. The community then had the moral and social authority to intervene, to counsel the husband, and to pressure him to fulfill his emotional obligations. In severe cases, this failure could even become grounds for a rabbinically sanctioned divorce, with the husband still required to pay the financial settlement outlined in the very document he had violated. This transformed a wife's emotional well-being from a personal concern into a communal responsibility, a matter of public justice. This reflects a core Jewish understanding of love that is deeply profound. Love in this context is not seen as a fleeting, romantic feeling that comes and goes. It is understood as a sacred duty, a mitzvah, an active commitment to another person's holistic well-being that is intertwined with one's spiritual and legal obligations. A successful marriage was a partnership dedicated to creating a shalom bayit, a peaceful home, and you could not have peace without kindness, respect, and emotional nurturance. The Ketuba, therefore, becomes more than a contract. It is a spiritual blueprint for the marriage, a guide that legally mandates the very behaviors that create a loving, stable, and holy union. This intricate blending of heartfelt emotion with enforceable law highlights something timeless about the human condition. It shows a deep, enduring desire to not just feel love, but to formalize its promises, to make its commitments tangible and secure. The ancient Jews understood that the most important promises, the ones that truly build a life together, needed the weight of law and the witness of community to protect them from the erosion of time, stress, and human frailty. This document stands as a powerful testament to the idea that true love is not just proclaimed in moments of passion, but is diligently, legally, and kindly nourished day after day. Now we travel to a city that was a true melting pot of the ancient world, Alexandria. Founded by Alexander the Great and thriving under the Ptolemaic dynasty, this was a place where Greek philosophy, Egyptian tradition, and Near Eastern commerce collided and intermingled on a grand scale. It was in this vibrant, cosmopolitan atmosphere that a new kind of marriage contract emerged, one that reflects this beautiful cultural fusion. A surviving document from around 300 BCE, written in Greek but found in Egypt, contains clauses that would have been almost unthinkable in classical Athens just a century before. This contract represents a significant evolution in thought, a Hellenistic innovation that placed a woman's emotional world on a new legal footing. The most striking feature of this agreement is its specific and eloquent language regarding the groom's duties. He doesn't just vow to protect and provide for his wife, he makes a formal, legal promise to honor her heart as much as her household. This is a profound and deliberate parallel. It legally equates the emotional interior of the woman, her heart, her feelings, her sense of self-worth, with the external, tangible property of the household. Her dignity and happiness are framed as assets as valuable as the family home, the stored grain, or the silver coins. The contract is essentially stating that a successful marriage requires investment in both realms equally. To neglect one is to destabilize the entire union. This was a radical departure from earlier Greek notions of marriage, which were overwhelmingly focused on producing legitimate heirs and managing property, with a wife's emotional life considered a private matter of little concern to the law. But the contract didn't stop at lofty language. It provided a powerful and unprecedented enforcement mechanism. In a provision that was exceptionally rare for its time, it granted the wife the legal right to initiate a divorce on the grounds of emotional neglect. If she could demonstrate to the authorities that her husband was consistently cold, disrespectful, or failing to honor her heart, she could petition to end the marriage. This was a monumental shift. For centuries, a Greek woman's ability to leave a marriage was extremely limited and almost always required the intervention and approval of her male relatives. This Alexandrian contract, influenced by the more progressive Egyptian legal traditions that allowed women greater agency, gave her a direct voice. Her personal feelings and her assessment of the relationship's emotional health were now valid evidence in a court of law. This remarkable document is a clear product of its unique time and place. The Greek rulers of Egypt, the Ptolemies, did not simply impose their own customs. They actively absorbed and adapted local practices. Egyptian culture had a long history of recognizing women's legal and economic rights, and their views on marriage often included expectations of mutual affection and respect. This Alexandrian contract is the tangible result of that cultural exchange. It shows Hellenistic Greeks beginning to synthesize their own philosophies with these foreign ideas, creating a new, more holistic vision of marriage that acknowledged love and emotional respect as critical, legally protected components of a successful partnership. This contract stands as a testament to a pivotal moment of evolution, a sign that across the ancient world, the understanding of relationships was deepening, becoming more nuanced, and increasingly willing to use the force of law to protect the fragile, essential architecture of the human heart. Leaving the Mediterranean world behind, we now journey to the Indian subcontinent during the reign of one of its greatest empires, under the Mauryan dynasty, which unified a vast territory around 250 BCE. Society was undergoing a profound transformation, deeply influenced by the spiritual philosophies of Buddhism and Hinduism. It is within this rich intellectual and ethical landscape that we encounter a marriage contract so revolutionary in its purpose. It redefines the very goal of partnership. This document, our eighth contract, moves beyond the familiar territories of material support and emotional care, venturing into a new dimension, the legal requirement for mutual spiritual elevation. The core vow of this agreement charges the spouses with the active duty to raise each other's spirits through words and deeds, framing marriage not as a static institution but as a dynamic vehicle for joint evolution. This was not a vague, inspirational suggestion. The contract provided remarkably specific, actionable examples of how this mutual elevation was to be achieved in daily life. It legally obligated each partner to offer daily compliments, words of affirmation and appreciation, designed to actively build up the other's sense of self-worth and confidence. In a world where daily interactions could easily be dominated by the mundane stresses of survival, this clause made the conscious practice of verbal encouragement a non-negotiable marital duty. Furthermore, it mandated shared meditation, requiring the couple to set aside time to sit in silence together, to align their breathing, and to focus their minds on shared intentions of peace, compassion, and understanding. This practice of joint meditation was seen as a direct method to synchronize their spiritual energies and dissolve the barriers of the individual ego, fostering a profound sense of unity that transcended the petty disagreements of daily life. The contract treated these actions not as optional extras for the especially devout, but as essential, legally enforceable maintenance for the health of the relationship itself. This perspective reveals a breathtakingly holistic view of love, one deeply rooted in the Dharmic principles flourishing under Mauryan rule. Both Hindu and Buddhist thought emphasized that the ultimate goal of human life was spiritual liberation, moksha or nirvana, a release from the cycle of suffering and rebirth. This contract operationalizes that grand philosophical goal within the intimate context of marriage. It proposes that the path to enlightenment could be walked together, with a loving partner serving as both mirror and guide. Your spouse's spiritual progress was not a separate, private journey. It was your own responsibility and your greatest opportunity for growth. To neglect their spirit was to fail in your own dharmic duty. Love, in this framework, was redefined as an active, compassionate force that actively sought the liberation of the beloved, making the home a sacred ashram, a training ground for the soul. The legal enforcement of this concept is what makes it so extraordinary. A breach of these terms, a husband who consistently offered criticism instead of compliments, or a wife who refused to participate in the shared spiritual practices, wasn't just a personal disappointment. It was a violation of a legally binding covenant, a failure to uphold a sworn duty to contribute to the other's path to enlightenment. While the specific penalties are lost to time, we can imagine that within the tightly knit guilds or communities where such contracts were used, social and religious pressure to comply would have been immense. Your standing in the community would be tied to your reputation as a supportive and elevating partner. This document, therefore, represents a fascinating historical experiment, an attempt to use the force of law not to govern property or behavior, but to mandate the very conditions that foster spiritual and emotional growth, treating the journey toward enlightenment as a joint venture worthy of the most serious contractual protection. But to truly grasp the significance of this Han Dynasty contract, we need to step back and understand the powerful philosophical forces that shaped it. This was an era dominated by Confucian thought, a system that meticulously defined the 5 key relationships that structured all of society, with the bond between husband and wife being one of the most fundamental. Confucianism taught the principle of shu, often translated as reciprocity or empathetic consideration. It was the golden rule: do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire. This wasn't just a nice idea, it was the expected standard of conduct for a virtuous person, a junzi. The marriage contract we're examining takes this lofty philosophical ideal and translates it into the most practical, daily terms imaginable. The husband's vow to tend to her sorrows as diligently as her comforts is the legal embodiment of shu. It is a contractual agreement to practice active empathy, to consciously consider his wife's inner emotional state, and to respond to it with the same seriousness and effort he would apply to any other duty, like providing food or shelter. Her sorrows were not her private problem to manage alone. They were a shared marital concern that demanded his attentive action. This concept of love as actionable duty is further illuminated by another core Confucian virtue, ren, which signifies benevolent, humane care for others. The contract legally mandated the husband to practice ren within his own home. Love, in this framework, was not a mysterious feeling that either existed or didn't. It was a series of deliberate, observable actions, a verb. It was the act of noticing a slight dimness in her eyes and asking a gentle question. It was the choice to sit and listen after a difficult day, to offer a comforting word, or to simply share a moment of quiet solidarity. The contract made these actions, these demonstrations of ren, a binding obligation. It recognized that a stable, harmonious household, which was the ultimate Confucian goal for society, could not be built on material foundations alone. It required the mortar of emotional attentiveness to hold it all together. A wife whose sorrows were tended to was a wife who could fully contribute to the family's harmony and prosperity. Her emotional well-being was directly linked to the success of the entire domestic unit. And this wasn't a promise made in a vacuum. The contract established a powerful enforcement mechanism rooted in the Confucian social structure, the right of the wife to appeal to the family elders. If she felt consistently emotionally neglected, if her husband was failing in his duty of heartfelt care, she could bring her case before the senior members of the extended family or the clan. This process transformed a private marital issue into a matter of communal concern, the elders, acting as arbiters of both family harmony and social virtue, would listen to her grievances. They would weigh her husband's actions against the Confucian ideals of reciprocity and benevolence that were enshrined in their very contract. Their intervention could range from stern admonishment and guidance for the husband to, in extreme cases, applying significant pressure on him to reform his behavior or face social censure and potential ramifications for his standing within the family and the wider community. This system of community regulation powerfully illustrates that love, or at least the dutiful actions that constituted it, was not a private affair but a publicly accountable pillar of a well-ordered society. This Han Dynasty Pact, therefore, stands as a masterful synthesis of law and philosophy. It is a tangible document where abstract ideas about human goodness and reciprocal duty were forged into the practical, daily reality of a marriage. It challenges our modern, Western-centric notion that historical marriages were universally cold and transactional, revealing instead a culture that possessed a sophisticated and legally articulate understanding of emotional labor. The husband's duty was dual, to ensure the comfort of the body and the comfort of the heart, with the latter being just as vital to the health of the union as the former. This profound emphasis on love as a series of accountable, deliberate actions perfectly sets the stage for the next chapter in our story, where we will see this idea taken to a fascinating new level of specificity, with a contract that literally budgets for joy. Imagine a dowry contract that reads less like a financial ledger and more like a modern-day couple's bucket list. This is precisely what we find in 1st century Roman Egypt, a cultural crossroads where the meticulous legalism of Rome met the expressive, life-affirming spirit of Egypt. Here, a remarkable marriage agreement was drafted, and it contained a clause that feels astonishingly contemporary. It legally obligated the husband to not just manage his wife's dowry for practical expenses, but to actively allocate a specific portion of those funds, a literal budget line item, for the sole purpose of activities that gladden the heart. This wasn't a vague suggestion, it was a precise financial commitment to joy. The contract got wonderfully specific about what these heart-gladdening activities should be. It listed things like paying for music lessons, ensuring they could attend theatrical performances together, and even funding trips to local festivals. Think about the profound implication here. In the midst of the daily grind of Roman-Egyptian life, the agricultural demands, the business concerns, the social obligations, this couple and the legal system that endorsed their agreement recognized that joy could not be left to chance. It had to be planned for, paid for, and prioritized. Emotional well-being was not seen as a frivolous luxury, but as a necessary component of a healthy marriage, as essential as food or shelter, and it required a deliberate financial investment. The husband was legally transformed from a mere provider into a curator of shared happiness, with a mandated responsibility to actively create moments of delight and cultural enrichment for his wife. And this responsibility carried serious weight, backed by the formidable engine of Roman contract law. The agreement wasn't just a list of nice ideas, it included clear penalties for non-compliance. If the husband failed to provide these joys, if he spent the designated joy fund on other things, or simply neglected to organize these outings, the wife had legal recourse. She could bring a complaint before the authorities, arguing that he had breached their contract. This could result in him being forced to pay a fine directly to her, or to immediately fund the activities he had neglected. In a sense, her happiness was treated as a financial asset he was entrusted to manage, and mismanagement had tangible consequences. This made the pursuit of joy an enforceable right, a legally protected aspect of her marital experience. This unique document is a perfect artifact of its time and place. It embodies the Roman genius for creating detailed, binding legal frameworks, but it applies that precision to a deeply Egyptian concept of life's enjoyment. Egyptian culture had long celebrated music, art, and festival as vital to the good life, pathways to connecting with the gods and with each other. The Romans, masters of administration, provided the legal structure to protect that cultural value within the institution of marriage. The result is this beautiful hybrid, a contract that understands love not just as a feeling but as a practice, one that requires material investment and intentional effort. It reveals an ancient understanding that love has a material dimension, that it is built not only on whispered words but also on purchased theater tickets, on the cost of a lute teacher, on the shared experience that a few coins can unlock. This pragmatic approach to affection shows a wisdom we are still rediscovering today, that the preservation of joy in a long-term relationship demands more than good intentions. It requires planning, priority, and sometimes a legally binding commitment to have a little fun. Now let's journey to the rose-red city of Petra, carved into the cliffs of the Jordanian desert, and step into the world of the Nabataeans. This was a civilization built on trade, their fortunes woven from the intricate network of caravan routes that crisscrossed the arid wilderness. Life for a Nabataean merchant was defined by long, perilous journeys across vast, empty landscapes, months spent away from home, navigating by the stars, facing thirst, bandits, and the profound isolation of the desert. It is against this backdrop of absence and uncertainty that we find our 11th contract, a document that ingeniously weaponizes love against the harsh realities of desert life. Dating to around 50 CE, this agreement between a wealthy trader and his wife is not focused on property or dowry in the traditional sense. Instead, its primary concern is mitigating the immense emotional toll of his profession, legally mandating companionship as the primary antidote to loneliness. The core vow of this contract is breathtakingly poetic and specific. It requires the couple to actively share stories and solace under the stars. This is so much more than a romantic notion. It is a detailed job description for their relationship during his travels. The clause legally obligated the husband to include his wife in his travel plans, but not as a mere accessory or burden. She was to be brought along as an essential emotional equal, a full partner in the journey. The contract outlines this duty with remarkable clarity. He was to ensure she had adequate provisions for the trip, that she traveled in safety and comfort comparable to his own, and most importantly, that he actively engaged with her throughout the experience. They were to talk, to share stories from their past, fears for their future, and observations about the present moment. They were to offer each other solace, comfort, and reassurance during the frightening or monotonous stretches of the journey. This transformed the caravan from a mere business expedition into a moving, shared household, a portable sanctuary of their relationship. This was a radical and pragmatic adaptation of love to an extreme environment. The Nabataeans understood a profound psychological truth, that loneliness is not merely the state of being alone, but the feeling of being disconnected. A person could be lonely in a crowded city, just as a couple could be isolated together in the vast emptiness of the desert if they failed to connect. This contract was a legal mechanism to actively combat that existential threat. It forced the couple to continually reinvest in their emotional bond, to use the shared adversity of the journey, the blistering days and cold nights, the endless horizon, as a forge to strengthen their connection, rather than as a wedge that would drive them apart. Her presence was not a logistical challenge to be managed, but a critical emotional resource for his own resilience and well-being, and vice versa. The enforcement of this clause was rooted in the very practical economics of Nabataean society. A trader's reputation was his most valuable asset. If a man gained a reputation for neglecting this spousal companionship clause, for leaving his wife behind and failing to provide this shared solace, it could damage his standing within the tight-knit merchant guilds. These were communities built on trust and mutual support. A man who couldn't honor the vows in his own marriage might be seen as a less reliable business partner. Furthermore, the contract itself likely included financial incentives or penalties tied to compliance, perhaps linking her agreed-upon share of the trade profits to his fulfillment of these companionship terms. This brilliantly tied his economic success directly to his emotional fidelity, making the health of their relationship a tangible component of his business success. This Nabataean vow offers a stunningly mature perspective on love. It frames emotional connection not as a fragile thing to be protected from hardship, but as a robust, active tool for overcoming hardship. Love, in this view, was the stories told around a desert campfire to ward off the silence of the night. It was the shared solace that made a barren landscape feel less empty. It was the mutual resilience that turned a difficult journey into a shared adventure. This contract shows us that for the Nabataeans, love was not separate from survival. It was a vital strategy for it, a practical, actionable force that was deemed important enough to be meticulously planned for, legally mandated, and woven directly into the demanding fabric of their daily lives. Deep in the heart of ancient Africa, in the powerful kingdom of Kush with its capital at Meroe, a civilization flourished that saw the world in a beautifully interconnected way. For the Cushites, the boundary between the emotional and the material, the personal and the communal, was not a sharp line but a fluid, breathing connection. This worldview is perfectly captured in a remarkable marriage contract from around 100 CE, an agreement that legally wove the threads of love directly into the fabric of the harvest and the prosperity of the entire community. At its core was a simple, profound commandment. The spouses were required to rejoice together at each harvest. This was far more than a suggestion to be happy. It was a legally binding obligation to actively, jointly, and publicly celebrate their successes as a couple, making shared joy a non-negotiable pillar of their union. The contract specified exactly what this rejoicing entailed. It wasn't a private smile but a communal performance of gratitude and happiness. The couple was obligated to host a specific type of feast for their family and neighbors, using a designated portion of their harvested grain to brew a special beer for the occasion. They were to distribute choice cuts of meat from their livestock and were even required to dance together in a traditional celebration of abundance. This transformed their personal good fortune into a communal event, a shared blessing that reinforced social bonds. But the contract's wisdom didn't stop at the good times. It displayed a deep understanding of emotional reciprocity by also including provisions for the inevitable hardships. It mandated that in times of poor harvest, sickness, or loss, the couple was similarly bound to share sorrows together, to retreat from the community for a period of mutual consolation, offering each other comfort and reaffirming their partnership in the face of adversity. The law recognized that a strong marriage had to be resilient in both sunshine and storm, and it legally enforced the behaviors that built that resilience. This profound link between emotional reciprocity and agricultural success reveals the Cushite holistic philosophy. They believed that the health of the land was intrinsically tied to the health of the human heart. A couple who fought, who harbored resentment, or who failed to celebrate their blessings was believed to create a spiritual dissonance that could literally blight their fields. Conversely, a household filled with shared joy, gratitude, and mutual support was thought to generate a positive energy that encouraged fertility in the soil and the womb. Love in this context was not a separate, private feeling. It was an active, cultivable force as essential to their survival as rain or sunlight. Their emotional state was seen as a direct input into their economic output, making the nurturing of their relationship a practical, agricultural necessity. This contract is a powerful testament to the sophisticated and nuanced understandings of love developed by ancient African societies, perspectives that have often been overlooked in broader historical narratives. It challenges the simplistic notion that pre-colonial African cultures were solely focused on pragmatic or economic alliances in marriage. The Cushite agreement shows a civilization that was deeply introspective about the human condition, recognizing that economic stability could not be achieved without emotional stability. They institutionalized practices that protected the emotional core of the family because they understood it was the foundation upon which everything else, prosperity, community, and legacy, was built. This holistic view, where love is inseparable from the daily rhythms of work, celebration, and survival, offers a refreshingly complete and deeply human perspective on what a historical relationship was designed to be. Now picture the vast, wind-swept expanses of Central Asia 2,000 years ago along the legendary Silk Road. Here, the Sogdians, a people famed as the master merchants and middlemen of this ancient global network, faced a unique and profound challenge to love: immense continent-spanning distance. A Sogdian trader might be gone for years, his journey taking him from the markets of Samarkand all the way to the capital of Tang Dynasty, China. In this world of prolonged and perilous absence, a simple marriage contract would never suffice. Their solution was a remarkable legal innovation, a pact that treated emotional connection not as a casualty of travel, but as its most precious cargo. This 13th contract from around 200 CE is a testament to devotion engineered for endurance, a legally binding strategy to keep love alive across thousands of miles. The core vow of this agreement is both poetic and heartbreakingly practical. The husband swore an oath to keep each other's hearts warm across distances. This beautiful phrase was then immediately followed by a list of highly specific, enforceable actions designed to make that warmth a tangible reality. The contract legally mandated the frequency of his communication, requiring him to send letters by trusted caravan at predetermined intervals, perhaps once every season, or with every major trade convoy heading back home. But it didn't stop there. It also stipulated that these letters couldn't just be dry updates on business. They had to contain personal details, words of affection, and reassurances of his fidelity and longing. Furthermore, the contract required him to send gifts, not of great monetary value necessarily, but of deep personal significance. These were tokens of remembrance: a bolt of unique fabric from a far-off land, a small carving, a special spice, something that would physically connect her to his distant world and prove she was always on his mind. This transformed the abstract idea of missing someone into a series of concrete, legally required tasks. This was emotional fidelity codified into law. The Sogdians, brilliant pragmatists that they were, understood that physical separation was the greatest threat to their relationships, breeding loneliness, doubt, and temptation on both ends. This contract was a preemptive strike against that threat. By legally enforcing communication and gift-giving, they were building a routine of connection, a rhythmic pulse of affection that could bridge the silence and the emptiness. It created a structure of expectation. A wife would know roughly when the next letter should arrive, giving her something to anticipate and holding her husband accountable if the caravans came and went with no word from him. This wasn't about controlling emotion, but about safeguarding the conditions that allowed it to flourish despite the circumstances. It recognized that love, like a fire, could die if left unattended, and so the law became the bellows ensuring the embers would still be glowing upon his return. The enforcement of this pact was deeply integrated into the very trade networks that necessitated it. A merchant's reputation was his currency. If a man developed a reputation for failing to uphold these terms, for being a neglectful correspondent who left his wife's heart in the cold, it could actually damage his business standing. Other merchants who also had wives and families back home might see him as less trustworthy, a man who didn't honor his most personal covenants. The tight-knit Sogdian merchant communities, often organized in family clans, would have applied social pressure, and the contract itself likely included financial penalties, perhaps requiring him to pay a fine to his wife's family for each missed communication or significant delay. His success as a provider was thus directly linked to his consistency as a partner, making emotional neglect an expensive and shameful failure. This Sogdian pact offers a timeless and deeply moving insight into the nature of love itself. It reveals that across cultures and centuries, people have understood that sustaining love across barriers requires more than just good intentions and fond memories. It demands deliberate, sustained effort. It requires the equivalent of sending those letters against all odds. The Sogdians, in their profound wisdom, chose not to leave this effort to chance. They drafted it into law, making the active maintenance of emotional connection a sworn duty, as vital to the health of their marriages as any financial transaction. This contract stands as a powerful monument to the human spirit's refusal to let geography defeat devotion, proving that even the longest road can be shortened by the constant, legally promised warmth of the heart. While the Sogdians were mastering the art of sustaining love across deserts, another civilization was delving into its profound spiritual depths, turning the marriage bond into a direct pathway to enlightenment. In the golden age of the Gupta Empire, around 400 CE, Indian philosophy, art, and science were reaching breathtaking new heights. It was an era of unparalleled intellectual and spiritual exploration, and this profound world, you didn't just stay in the temples and universities. It seeped directly into the legal documents that governed daily life, transforming the marriage contract into something far more sacred than a simple social agreement. The Gupta model we're examining now is perhaps the most philosophically ambitious we've encountered yet, a document that doesn't just ask spouses to be kind or joyful, but to actively participate in each other's spiritual liberation. The central vow of this contract is deceptively simple yet infinitely profound. It legally obligated both partners to meditate on each other's happiness daily. This phrase, meditate on, is the key that unlocks its entire meaning. This wasn't about simply wishing for your spouse to be happy in a passive way. It was a mandated, disciplined practice of focused contemplation. Each spouse was required to sit in stillness and actively bring their partner's well-being into the center of their consciousness. They were to visualize their happiness, to cultivate a genuine, heartfelt desire for their joy and freedom from suffering, and to send those intentions out into the universe. This practice, known in various spiritual traditions as a form of loving kindness or metta meditation, was written into law as a non-negotiable marital duty. The contract specified the ideal times for this, often at dawn and dusk, turning the home into a private ashram, a sanctuary for this shared spiritual exercise. But the contract didn't stop at private meditation. It extended this principle into shared rituals designed to weave their spiritual lives together into a single tapestry. One of the most beautiful clauses required the couple to perform shared prayers for each other's well-being. This wasn't a generic prayer for health or prosperity. It was highly specific. They might pray for each other's success in overcoming a personal flaw, for clarity in their individual spiritual pursuits, or for the strength to fulfill their dharma, their sacred duty in life. In doing this, each partner became the other's primary spiritual supporter, their most ardent cheerleader on the path to moksha, or liberation. The document also encouraged, and in some cases required, other bonding rituals, such as studying sacred texts together, making joint pilgrimages to holy sites, or even engaging in synchronized breathing exercises to harmonize their energies. The goal was to dissolve the barriers of the individual ego, to create a we that was greater than the sum of its parts, a united front on the journey toward enlightenment. Now, you might wonder, how on earth do you legally enforce something as personal as meditation? The Gupta legal system, sophisticated and deeply integrated with religious authority, had a method. Breaches of these spiritual clauses were not treated as minor infractions. If one spouse consistently neglected these practices, refusing to participate in the shared prayers, or demonstrating a clear lack of concern for their partner's spiritual welfare, it was considered a serious violation of the marital covenant. The wronged party could bring the matter before a council of elders or a guild court, which often included Brahmin priests. The emphasis wasn't on punishing with fines, though some contracts did include small donations to temples as penance. The primary goal was corrective and restorative. The neglectful spouse would be counseled, guided, and often given specific spiritual penances to perform, such as additional prayers, fasting, or service. Their social and religious standing within the community was tied to their reputation as a dutiful partner, and a failure in this sacred duty could bring shame upon their family. The enforcement was therefore a powerful blend of social pressure and spiritual consequence, designed not to punish but to realign the individual with their highest dharma, that of a supportive, spiritually attentive partner. This Gupta contract stands as a monumental achievement in the history of human relationships because it challenges a very modern idea, the compartmentalization of our lives. We often think of law, emotion, and spirituality as separate spheres. The law is cold and public, emotions are private and unpredictable, and spirituality is a personal weekend pursuit. The Gupta worldview, as expressed in this document, saw no such divisions. They believed that the path to the divine was walked through our everyday human connections, and that the ultimate purpose of marriage was to assist each other in that sacred journey. Love, in this view, was the active, daily practice of willing your partner's highest good and deepest happiness, and they saw this not as a poetic ideal, but as a principle so vital to human flourishing that it was worthy of being encoded into the law itself. This profound integration presents a stunningly holistic vision of what a partnership can be, a model that continues to inspire and challenge our modern understanding of love's true purpose. Leaving behind the spiritual aspirations of the Gupta Empire, we now find ourselves in the dazzling, domed heart of a new kind of power, the Byzantine Empire. In the year 600 CE, Constantinople stood as a magnificent bastion of Christianity, Roman law, and Greek philosophy, a fusion that would produce one of the most progressive legal documents in our entire journey. Here, in the shadow of the great Hagia Sophia, a new ideal of marriage was being formally written into law, one that moved beyond promises of joy or spiritual support to establish something even more fundamental, the legal right to emotional safety. This Byzantine marriage charter introduces a phrase of breathtaking power and beauty, legally obligating the husband to provide his wife with a sanctuary for her heart. This concept of a sanctuary is so rich with meaning. In the 6th century, a sanctuary was a sacred, inviolable space, a church where even a fugitive could find refuge and protection from worldly harm. To apply this term to a woman's emotional state within marriage was a revolutionary legal and philosophical leap. It framed the home not just as a place of residence, but as a sacred emotional refuge where her spirit should feel as safe and protected as a seeker of asylum within holy walls. The contract elaborated on this, specifying that the husband must not be a source of emotional distress, which could encompass everything from verbal abuse and public humiliation to cold indifference and habitual disrespect. His primary duty, according to this new standard, was to be a guardian of her inner peace, actively creating an environment of trust, respect, and psychological security. This was love redefined not as passion or poetry, but as the ultimate form of protection. The profound influence of early Christian theology on this clause is unmistakable. Byzantine society was deeply shaped by the Church's evolving teachings on marriage, which increasingly emphasized concepts like mutual subjection, compassion, and self-sacrificial love, drawing from the epistles of Paul that called for husbands to love their wives as Christ loved the Church, a love that is nurturing, protective, and self-giving. This theological shift began to seep into the secular legal code, particularly under the influence of Emperor Justinian's extensive reforms. The law began to reflect the idea that a husband's authority was not a license for tyranny, but a responsibility for benevolent, Christ-like care. A man who emotionally terrorized his wife was not just a bad husband, he was failing in his Christian duty, and the state, as the protector of a Christian social order, now had an interest in intervening. But this was not merely a religious ideal, it was a right with formidable legal teeth. The most groundbreaking aspect of this Byzantine charter was the recourse it offered. It explicitly granted a wife the right to seek an annulment, a formal, legal dissolution of the marriage that treated it as though it had never been validly undertaken, on the grounds of persistent emotional neglect or distress. This was a staggering advancement for women's rights. To understand how radical this was, we must remember that for centuries, across numerous empires, divorce, if available to women at all, was almost exclusively granted for concrete reasons like adultery, abandonment, or impotence. These were acts that could be witnessed and proven by third parties. Now, for perhaps the first time in a major legal system, a woman's subjective emotional experience, her testimony of a cold, cruel, or fearful home environment, could be considered valid evidence in a court of law. Of course, proving emotional distress in the 6th century was a formidable challenge. A wife would need to marshal witnesses, likely family members, household slaves, or neighbors who could testify to the husband's consistently harsh behavior or her visible state of misery. The process was undoubtedly difficult and socially perilous, yet the mere existence of this legal pathway was revolutionary. It acknowledged that harm could be psychological and not just physical, and that such harm could invalidate the very purpose of the marital union. It sent a clear message that emotional safety was not a luxury request from a wife, but a foundational component of a just and lawful marriage. The Byzantine legal system, in its complex and often contradictory way, was beginning to codify a vision of love where justice and emotional well-being were inextricably linked, establishing a precedent that would quietly echo through the corridors of history for centuries to come. Imagine a marriage where your anniversary gift wasn't just expected, it was a legal requirement, and failure to produce a sufficiently heartfelt poem could land you in trouble with the authorities. This was the reality for the educated elite of China's Tang Dynasty, a golden age of poetry, art, and breathtaking cultural refinement. In this era, around 800 CE, we find a contract that stands apart from all others, a document that treats love not as a feeling to be felt, but as an art form to be practiced, perfected, and legally presented. This pact, our 16th, moves beyond the realms of material support, emotional safety, or spiritual duty, elevating the marriage union to the highest plane of cultural achievement, the shared creation of beauty. Its core vow is a thing of pure elegance, legally obligating both spouses to compose poems for each other's hearts, transforming the private language of affection into a public, annual performance of artistic devotion. This was not a vague, aspirational suggestion tucked away in the fine print. The contract was remarkably specific, reading almost like the rules for a prestigious cultural competition held within the confines of the home. It mandated that the husband and wife must exchange original, handwritten poems composed specifically for one another on a predetermined date each year, often the anniversary of their wedding. But it didn't stop there. The document included what we might call quality control clauses. It warned against the use of cliched phrases or overly common imagery lifted from the popular poets of the day. It demanded genuine creativity and discernible effort, judging the work on its originality, its technical skill in adhering to the strict tonal and rhythmic rules of Tang poetry, and most importantly, its perceived sincerity. A hastily scribbled generic verse would be seen as a profound insult, a breach of contract as serious as failing to provide financial support. the penalty for such a creative failure wasn't always a fine. Often, it was social and cultural shame. A poorly received poem could become a topic of gossip among their sophisticated peer group, damaging one's hard-won reputation as a cultured member of the elite. In a society where social standing was everything, this was a powerful deterrent against emotional and artistic laziness. To understand why the Tang elite would go to such lengths, we must step into their world. This was the age of Lai Bai and Du Fu, where poetry was not merely a pastime but the very currency of the soul, the primary medium for expressing the deepest truths of human experience. The Tang believed that to be civilized was to be poetic. Therefore, a successful marriage among the literate class was expected to be more than a harmonious domestic arrangement. It was to be an aesthetic and intellectual partnership, a meeting of two cultivated minds. Love, in this view, was not something that just existed. It was a delicate cultural artifact that required constant cultivation through shared learning, artistic exchange, and mutual appreciation for beauty. The annual exchange of poems was the ultimate proof of this ongoing cultivation. It was a ritual that forced each partner to pause, to reflect deeply on their spouse's unique qualities, and to articulate their affection through the most respected and challenging art form of their culture. It was the equivalent of a yearly State of the Union address for the heart, delivered in iambic pentameter and rich with metaphor. This contract offers us a stunningly sophisticated vision of historical romance, one that completely upends the modern cliché of the emotionally distant pre-modern marriage. For the Tang elite, love was an active, intellectual pursuit. A husband proved his devotion not just by providing jade and silk, but by wrestling with meter and diction to capture the precise shade of his wife's grace in a couplet. A wife expressed her esteem not only through managing the household, but by crafting a poem that demonstrated her keen understanding of her husband's ambitions and inner life. Their bond was strengthened not just by shared beds, but by shared libraries, by the collaborative editing of each other's verses, and by the quiet pride of being married to a truly talented wordsmith. This legally enforced poetic exchange ensured that amidst the pressures of official careers and social obligations, the couple would never forget to see each other as they did in their courting days, as fascinating, complex individuals worthy of sustained artistic attention. It was a brilliant mechanism designed to prevent the emotional drift that can slowly empty a marriage of its magic, legally mandating that both partners continue to court each other's minds for as long as they both shall live. Now we arrive at a document that represents a true turning point in our story, a contract that shifts the very power dynamics of love's negotiation. In the intellectual and cultural heart of the 9th century world, Abbasid Baghdad, a thriving, sophisticated Islamic society, was redefining what was possible within the framework of marriage. Here, under the vast umbrella of Islamic law, or Sharia, we find a legal instrument of breathtaking modernity, the marriage contract or Act al-Nikah. While the basic framework of the Nikah was well established, the vibrant, cosmopolitan environment of Baghdad saw the rise of a remarkable practice. Women, or more often their male guardians acting on their detailed instructions, began to insert specific, personalized conditions into these contracts. These weren't just financial clauses, they were demands for emotional rights, carving out a legally protected space for happiness and respect within the marriage itself. Imagine a young woman from an educated Baghdad family about to enter into a marriage arranged for social and economic reasons. While she couldn't overturn the system, the flexible nature of Islamic contract law gave her a powerful tool to shape her future lived experience. Before the agreement was finalized and witnessed, she could stipulate a series of conditions. Two of the most poignant and common were the right to cheerful companionship and the freedom from gloomy silence. Let's unpack the profound meaning behind these phrases. The right to cheerful companionship was a formal demand that her husband engage with her as a friend and joyful partner, not just as the manager of his household. It was a legal claim to his time, his attention, and his positive emotional energy. The freedom from gloomy silence is even more psychologically astute. It protected her from the suffocating emotional neglect of a perpetually sullen, withdrawn, or stonewalling husband. It recognized that active unkindness wasn't the only form of abuse, that a cold, silent home could be its own form of emotional torture, and that a wife had a right to be spared from it. The fact that these conditions were not only written but were also legally enforceable under the scrutiny of a Qadi or Islamic judge is what makes this contract so groundbreaking. If a husband consistently violated these terms, if he was chronically morose, refused to speak to her for days, or consistently excluded her from his social and conversational life, his wife had a legitimate claim. She could bring her case before the court, present witnesses to the oppressive atmosphere in her home, and seek a legal remedy. The judge, guided by the Islamic legal principle of upholding the terms of a valid contract, could order the husband to fulfill his stipulated duties or face consequences, which could include compelling him to pay for her to have a separate vacation to escape the gloom, or even, in some interpretations, providing grounds for a form of annulment if the conditions were deemed so fundamental. Their breach invalidated the marriage's purpose. This gave a woman a form of recourse that was virtually unheard of in most other contemporary societies, transforming her from a passive recipient of whatever emotional treatment her husband chose to provide into an active negotiator for her own well-being. This practice didn't emerge from a vacuum. It was a direct reflection of core early Islamic principles that were being vigorously debated and refined in the scholarly circles of Baghdad. The Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad placed a strong emphasis on mutual consent in marriage, kindness and compassion between spouses, and the idea that the marital relationship was one of mutual protection and garments for one another. Love and mercy were stated to be the signs of a union blessed by God. The legal scholars of the Abbasid era, in their brilliant and nuanced development of Islamic jurisprudence, recognized that these spiritual ideals needed practical mechanisms to be realized. The practice of inserting conditions into the marriage contract became that mechanism. It allowed the overarching religious duty of kindness to be translated into specific, personalized, and legally actionable promises. This framed love not just as a spontaneous emotion, but as a religious obligation that could be defined, agreed upon, and dutifully fulfilled. This contract from Baghdad is therefore far more than a historical curiosity. It is a powerful testament to the historical roots of love as a negotiated partnership. It reveals a society that, at its best, understood that a successful marriage requires more than just a signature on a page. It requires the ongoing, conscious consent of both hearts. By giving women a formal voice in defining the emotional terms of their marriage, Islamic law provided a framework for fairness that acknowledged the wife's emotional world as a legitimate domain of legal concern. It shows us that the desire for a joyful, respectful, and communicative partnership is not a modern invention, but a timeless human need that one of history's greatest civilizations had the wisdom to not only recognize but to actively protect with the full force of its legal system. Now we sail into the fierce and formidable world of the Vikings, a culture often remembered for its longships and raids, but one that held a surprisingly profound and legally articulated view of marriage. In the harsh environment of Scandinavia around the year 1000 CE, survival was never guaranteed. life was a constant battle against the elements, rival clans, and the sheer unpredictability of fate. It was within this crucible of adversity that the Viking marriage contract, known as the brudkop, evolved into something far more than a simple exchange of wealth. This agreement recognized that the greatest asset a couple could possess was not silver or land, but an unbreakable emotional fortitude, a quality they legally bound themselves to cultivate and share. The central vow of this document was a powerful call to arms for the heart. Spouses swore to face sorrows together with courage, transforming their union into a pact of mutual emotional resilience. This was not a vague promise to be nice to one another. The brudkop was a highly practical document that anticipated the specific, brutal hardships of Norse life. It contained explicit clauses detailing the duty of mutual comfort during times of extreme crisis. For instance, if a raid resulted in the death of a child or the destruction of their home, the contract obligated both partners to actively provide solace, forbidding either from retreating into solitary grief or despair. In the event of a famine, the vow required them to share not only their dwindling food but also their emotional strength, to bolster each other's spirit and will to live when hope seemed lost. This legal framework understood that in a world of relentless hardship, emotional collapse could be as deadly as a sword wound. A partner who succumbed to despair could jeopardize the entire family's survival. Therefore, emotional support was not a soft luxury. It was a critical survival skill, and the brudkop treated it with the same seriousness as any other essential duty. This contract reveals a Viking ideal of love that is both rugged and deeply beautiful. While their sagas are filled with tales of individual heroism, the brudkop shows that they equally valued a different kind of bravery, the courage to be vulnerable with a partner, to share fear and grief openly, and to then jointly forge that raw emotion into renewed strength. Love, in this view, was not about picturesque romance or effortless happiness. It was a partnership in bravery, a daily practice of choosing to stand back to back against whatever the world threw at them. It was the promise that no matter how dark the winter night or how fierce the storm, you would not have to face it alone. Your spouse was your shield brother in the battle of life, sworn to guard your spirit as fiercely as they would guard your back in a fight. The enforcement of this emotional pact was woven into the very fabric of Viking society, which was built upon honor and the sanctity of one's word. A person who violated the terms of the brudkop, who was emotionally absent in a crisis, who crumbled under pressure and failed to offer strength, or who abandoned their partner to face sorrow alone would suffer a severe loss of honor or somi. In culture where reputation was everything, to be known as an emotionally unreliable partner was a devastating social stain that could affect one's standing in the community and even their prospects in business and law. The family and community acted as witnesses and enforcers of this covenant, applying immense social pressure to uphold these vows. Furthermore, the financial terms of the brudkop itself, which involved the exchange of the munder from the groom and the heimanfylgja from the bride, were intrinsically linked to the fulfillment of all its clauses, including the emotional ones. A failure to provide emotional courage could be grounds for the aggrieved party or their family to demand restitution or even dissolve the marriage, with serious financial consequences for the one who broke the vow. This Viking contract offers a starkly powerful perspective on the nature of love and commitment. It strips romance down to its most essential, resilient core. For the Norse, love was not measured in grand gestures on calm seas, but in the quiet, steadfast courage shown during the storm. It was the strength to hold a partner while they wept for a lost child, the resolve to share the last piece of bread with a hopeful word, and the bravery to face an uncertain future with a united front. The Brudkop legally mandated this emotional bravery because the Vikings understood, perhaps better than most, that the deepest bonds are not forged in comfort, but in the shared fire of adversity. This rugged expression of affection reveals love's most fundamental and enduring role, to be the bedrock of collective endurance, the one unbreakable pact that allows us to survive and even thrive against all odds. Now we step into the illuminated world of 12th century French nobility, where the harsh realities of feudal politics collided with a dazzling new cultural obsession, courtly love. In the great halls of castles like those in Champagne and Aquitaine, a fascinating transformation was taking place. The traditional marriageum, a marriage contract long concerned solely with land, titles, and military alliances, began to absorb the flowery language of the troubadours and poets. A surviving contract from around 1100 CE reveals this stunning shift. Amidst the dry clauses detailing the transfer of a strategically located parcel of land or the number of knights owed to a liege lord, we find a vow that would have been unthinkable just a generation before. The groom formally pledges to admire her heart as well as her lineage, legally binding himself to value his bride's inner qualities, her wit, her grace, her character, with the same seriousness as her bloodline and dowry. This single phrase represents a seismic crack in the foundation of medieval matrimony, a formal acknowledgement that a noble marriage could be about more than just power and property. This was not merely a sentimental addition, it was a contract with highly specific performative requirements. The document legally enforced a series of gestures directly lifted from the rituals of courtly love. The husband was obligated to compose and publicly recite poetry in praise of his wife's virtues, not just her beauty. He was required to honor her publicly in song at great feasts, celebrating her wisdom and kindness in front of the entire court. He might be contractually bound to wear her colors in tournaments, declaring his devotion for all to see. These were not private acts of affection but highly theatrical public performances, designed to be witnessed and admired by their aristocratic peers. The contract treated these displays of romantic devotion not as optional romantic flourishes, but as a chivalric duty, as essential to his role as a knight and lord as his oath of fealty to his king. In this new framework, being a bad poet or a neglectful public admirer was a breach of contract, a failure in his knightly vows as much as a personal failing. To understand why this happened, we must look to the powerful women who shaped these courts, particularly figures like Elena of Aquitaine and her daughter, Marie, Countess of Champagne. Their courts became vibrant centers of a new cultural experiment, hosting elaborate courts of love where troubadours performed and nobles debated the intricate rules of romantic conduct. In this environment, a new social currency emerged: romantic prestige. A lord who was not only powerful but also a devoted, eloquent admirer of his lady gained immense status. His wife, in turn, gained social power by being the object of such celebrated devotion. Her worth was no longer measured solely by the acres she brought to the marriage or the sons she bore, but by the quality of the admiration she inspired. The emotional connection between a couple, therefore, became a public status symbol, a performance of refinement and cultural superiority that set the high aristocracy apart from the merely wealthy or militarily powerful. A marriage based on land alone was common. A marriage that also exhibited the polished ideals of courtly love was truly noble. This contract marks a pivotal moment in the evolution of love itself, capturing the precise instant when it began its slow journey from a purely practical arrangement toward a form of cultural performance. For the first time, we see the ideals of romance, once confined to extramarital affairs and poetic fantasies, being deliberately and legally woven into the fabric of the marriage institution itself. It wasn't yet about marrying for love as we understand it. These were still strategic unions, but it was about performing love, about using the language and gestures of romance to enhance the social and cultural capital of the union. The home was becoming a stage, and marriage a drama of mutual admiration played out before an audience of peers. This theatrical expression highlights love's powerful new role in crafting social identity, proving that even in a world ruled by the sword, the pen, and the heart could command a unique and formidable power of their own. While the nobles of Europe were turning marriage into a theatrical performance of courtly love, a very different and profoundly communal vision of partnership was flourishing in one of the wealthiest and most powerful empires on earth. In the Mali Empire of West Africa around 1300 CE, under the reign of legendary rulers like Mansa Musa, society was organized around a powerful philosophy known as Ubuntu, often summarized by the phrase, "I am because we are." This worldview, which sees individual identity and well-being as inextricably linked to the health of the entire community, didn't just exist in abstract thought. It was written directly into the legal documents that governed daily life, including the marriage contract. The Mauryan Pact we examine now is perhaps the most radical departure from Western individualism in our entire collection. A document that redefines love not as a private flame between two people, but as a communal fire that the entire village is responsible for keeping alive. This contract begins not with the couple but with their extended families. It legally obligates both the bride's and the groom's kin networks to actively contribute to the couple's happiness. This was not a vague, well-meaning suggestion. It was a binding list of specific, mandated duties. The families were required to take turns organizing annual festivals in honor of the couple, events designed to publicly celebrate their union and reinforce their social bonds. But the responsibilities went far beyond party planning. The contract included detailed clauses for conflict resolution, requiring elder family members from both sides to mediate any serious disagreements between the husband and wife. They were to do so with wise words and a peaceful heart, aiming not to assign blame but to restore harmony, treating the couple's emotional equilibrium as a matter of urgent communal concern. Furthermore, the families were tasked with providing material support that directly fostered joy, such as gifting a portion of their harvest for a feast or contributing funds for the couple to take a restorative retreat together during difficult times. In this legal framework, a problem in the marriage was never just the couple's problem. It was a tear in the social fabric that the entire community was sworn to mend. This profound institutionalization of love as a social glue reveals a Mauryan understanding of relationships that is both practical and deeply spiritual. The empire's immense wealth, built on gold and salt trade, could have easily led to marriages being treated as cold, economic mergers. Instead, the law recognized that true prosperity was meaningless without communal joy and emotional stability. A couple constantly at war was a drain on the entire village's energy and productivity, while a happy, harmonious couple contributed positively to the spirit and success of everyone around them. Therefore, investing in the happiness of a marriage was an investment in the community's overall health. The contract legally operationalized the Ubuntu philosophy, making it everyone's business to ensure that the foundational unit of society, the family, was strong, resilient, and filled with affection. Love was seen as a public utility, like a clean well or a safe path, something that required collective effort to maintain for the benefit of all. The enforcement of this pact was woven into the very structure of Mauryan society, which was organized through a system of guilds, clans, and elder councils. If a family neglected its duties, if they failed to organize the festival, or if they took sides and inflamed a couple's dispute rather than resolving it, they faced real social and economic consequences. Their neglect would be seen as a violation of their social responsibilities, damaging their reputation and honor within the community. This could affect their standing in trade negotiations, their influence in local governance, and their ability to call upon others for help in the future. The contract created a system of reciprocal accountability. The community supported the couple, and in return, the couple's happiness became a visible testament to the community's virtue and strength. This system offered a powerful alternative to the model of marriage as a private fortress, suggesting instead that the strongest unions are those surrounded by a village dedicated to their success, proving that love, in its most sustainable form, is a shared responsibility that truly takes a village to nurture and protect. While the nobles of France were performing courtly love for an audience, and the communities of Mali were collectively nurturing marital joy, another vast empire was developing a uniquely sophisticated legal mechanism for intimate happiness. In the heart of 16th century Istanbul, beneath the grand domes of the Ottoman judicial courts, a system was in place that gave a woman a formal, powerful voice in shaping the emotional landscape of her own marriage. The Ottoman nikah, or marriage contract, was a flexible instrument, and it was within its margins and addendums that we find some of the most poignant and specific emotional negotiations in history. A surviving document from around 1500 CE reveals how a bride, often with the help of a male guardian acting on her precise instructions, could insert personalized conditions into the binding agreement. These weren't vague wishes, they were concrete, actionable demands for her future well-being. Two of the most common and powerful were the stipulation for gentle speech and the guaranteed right to time for conversation. Let's unpack the profound weight of these simple phrases. The condition of gentle speech was a legal shield against the corrosive damage of harsh words, constant criticism, and verbal abuse. It legally obligated the husband to monitor his tone, to choose his words with care and respect, and to avoid raising his voice in anger. This recognized that a home could be emotionally uninhabitable even if all material needs were met, and it gave the wife a claim to a peaceful auditory environment. The demand for time for conversation is perhaps even more revolutionary. In a patriarchal society, a husband could easily retreat into his own world of work, coffeehouses, and male company, leaving his wife isolated and starved for intellectual and emotional engagement. This clause legally required him to set aside dedicated, undistracted time to simply talk with her, to discuss his day, to listen to her thoughts, to share stories, and to connect as mental and emotional equals. It was a legally mandated antidote to neglectful silence, ensuring she would be a companion, not just a housekeeper. The true genius of the Ottoman system, however, lay in its enforcement. These were not merely hopeful promises, they were legally actionable terms. The entire nikah contract was overseen by a qadi, an Islamic judge, and witnessed by respected members of the community. If a husband consistently violated these conditions, if his home was filled with harsh words or suffocating silence, his wife had a clear path to justice. She could bring her case before the Islamic court. There, she could present witnesses, perhaps a neighbor who overheard constant shouting, or a family member who could testify to her visible depression and loneliness. The qadi, guided by the core Islamic legal principle of upholding the stipulated terms of a valid contract, had the authority to intervene. He could order the husband to fulfill his duties, to amend his behavior, and in some cases, even impose financial penalties or compel him to provide his wife with a separate vacation to escape the stressful environment. In extreme cases of persistent breach, some legal opinions even held that such violations could provide grounds for the wife to seek a form of annulment, as the fundamental conditions upon which she had agreed to the marriage were not being met. This remarkable legal flexibility did not emerge from a vacuum. It was a direct reflection of the Ottoman Empire's immense diversity and the pragmatic nature of its legal system, which blended imperial decrees with Islamic Sharia law and local customs. The Ottoman state was a mosaic of ethnicities, languages, and traditions, and its stability relied on a legal framework that could accommodate this variety with a degree of fairness. Furthermore, it was deeply rooted in early Islamic principles that emphasized kindness, mutual consent, and compassionate treatment within marriage, considering these to be religious duties. The practice of inserting conditions into the nikah became the practical mechanism that turned these spiritual ideals into enforceable, daily realities. It acknowledged that a successful marriage required more than a signature. It required the ongoing, conscious fulfillment of mutual emotional needs. This Ottoman contract, therefore, stands as a powerful testament to the historical depth of emotional negotiation. It reveals a society that, at its best, understood that harmony was not about suppressing a woman's needs, but about creating a formal channel for her to articulate them and have them protected by law. It shows us that the desire for a gentle, communicative, and respectful partnership is a timeless human aspiration, and that one of history's greatest empires had the legal sophistication to not only recognize this but to build a system where love, in its most practical daily expressions, could be thoughtfully articulated, mutually agreed upon, and dutifully upheld under the watchful eye. Court, amid the flourishing artistic revolution of 17th century Florence, where the very air seemed charged with the spirit of creation, we find a marriage contract that redefines the very essence of partnership for a specific class of people, the artists. This document, emerging from the studios of Florence around 1600 CE, is a world away from the feudal agreements of old. Here, the dowry might include paints, brushes, and blocks of Carrara marble alongside the traditional linens and coin. The most extraordinary clause, however, moves far beyond the transfer of assets. It legally binds the couple to a shared creative mission, formally requiring them to create beauty together as an ongoing, active duty within their marriage. This was not a hobby or a pastime. It was the contractual heart of their union, a mandated collaboration that wove their emotional and creative lives into a single, inseparable tapestry. The contract was remarkably detailed in its expectations. It often specified the nature of these collaborative projects, which could range from a husband and wife jointly painting a religious altarpiece. Perhaps he would sketch the figures while she mastered the intricate background landscapes and glazing of colors, to a sculptor and a jeweler spouse combining their skills to create breathtakingly detailed bronze sculptures adorned with semi-precious stones. The agreement might designate set hours each week that were to be protected solely for their shared artistic work, time that was to be considered as sacred and inviolable as any business meeting. But this clause wasn't just about output, it was about process. It legally framed their love as an artistic partnership, recognizing that the act of creating together, of solving compositional problems, of debating the use of light, of sharing the quiet focus of the studio was itself a powerful nurturer of their emotional bond. Their relationship was to be their greatest masterpiece, continuously refined and improved through shared creative endeavor. And like any serious contract in mercantile Florence, this one had teeth. The penalties for neglecting these shared artistic endeavors were not trivial. If one spouse consistently prioritized solo commissions or failed to contribute to their joint projects, they could be found in breach of their marital agreement. The consequences could be financial, requiring the neglectful partner to forfeit a portion of their independent earnings to the other. In a community where reputation was everything, such a breach was also a profound social and professional stain. An artist known for failing their collaborative marital vows might find it harder to secure prestigious commissions from the church or wealthy patrons, who often saw the stability and harmony of an artist's personal life as a reflection of their ability to complete important work on time and to specification. This enforcement mechanism reveals how seriously these terms were taken. The shared creation of beauty was not a frivolous add-on but a central pillar of the marriage's economic and social purpose. This Florentine contract is a perfect embodiment of the core ideals of the Renaissance, a period that celebrated the infinite potential of human creativity and the pursuit of beauty as a path to the divine. The era gave us the concept of the Renaissance man, a polymath who excelled in multiple fields. This document applies that ideal to the marriage itself, creating the Renaissance partnership. It reflects the belief that love itself could be a sublime source of inspiration and mutual growth, that two creative souls joined together could achieve more than the sum of their parts. Their home was not just a domestic space but a bottega, a workshop of both art and affection, where the lines between life and work, between loving and creating, were beautifully and intentionally blurred. This was love fully integrated into the cultural and economic engine of the elite, where passion and profession became one. The ripple effects of such partnerships likely contributed to the very momentum of the Renaissance itself. Imagine the innovation that sprang from these sanctioned creative dialogues, new techniques developed through experimentation, bold ideas forged in the safe and supportive crucible of a marital collaboration. This contract suggests that behind some of the era's great art, there may have been not a lone, tormented genius, but a harmonious and legally bound creative duo, pushing each other to new heights. Such arrangements show love's often overlooked role as a driver of historical innovation, proving that the deepest human connections can do more than warm the heart. They can shape the very course of culture, leaving a legacy of beauty that endures for centuries. Now we enter a world of intoxicating beauty and refined sensibility, the dazzling court of the Mughal Empire in 18th century India. Here, amidst the scented gardens and marble pavilions, the very air seemed to hum with the rhythms of poetry. It was a culture where the art of the word was revered above almost all else, and this profound aesthetic value didn't just belong in books, it was woven directly into the fabric of the law. The Mughal marriage contract, known as the Companionate, was typically a straightforward document outlining the financial settlement, or mahr, owed to the bride. But in the most sophisticated circles, this legal instrument was transformed into something breathtakingly lyrical. A surviving Companionate from around 1700 CE reveals this stunning fusion. Amidst the standard clauses, the entire document is framed not in dry legalese, but in the rich, metaphorical language of Persian poetry, the official cultural language of the Mughal elite. The legal vows themselves are composed in rhyming couplets, turning the contract into a work of art that is as beautiful to read as it is binding to obey. The central, legally enforceable promise of this particular contract is a phrase of exquisite tenderness. The groom vows to verse her heart with tenderness daily. Let's pause to appreciate the genius of this formulation. The word verse is used as a verb, an active, creative act. He isn't just promising to feel tenderness. He is legally binding himself to actively craft that feeling into verse, to articulate it, to make it tangible and beautiful through the disciplined art of poetry. The object of this action is not her ears but her heart. This suggests the poetry is meant to be more than just heard. It is meant to be absorbed, to resonate deep within her being, to become a part of her emotional landscape. And the adverb daily is the final, crucial masterstroke. This isn't a promise for special occasions or anniversaries. It is a commitment to a daily practice, a relentless, ongoing cultivation of affection through language. His love was to be a constant, creative effort, as regular and essential as the sunrise. But what truly sets this contract apart and gives it its remarkable power is the agency it granted to the wife. This wasn't a one-sided performance for her passive appreciation. The document explicitly granted her the legal right to demand poetic expressions of affection as proof of emotional commitment. This is a concept of stunning modernity. If her husband grew lax in his poetic duties, if days or weeks passed without a new verse, if the verses he did offer felt hollow, rushed, or insincere, she had formal recourse. She could quite literally call him out on it. She could remind him of his sworn vow and demand her due. This transformed the poem from a romantic gesture into a form of tangible evidence, a measurable metric of his ongoing emotional investment. His creativity and effort became the currency of his devotion, and the contract gave her the right to audit his accounts. In a society where women's options were often limited, this clause was a sophisticated tool, allowing a wife to hold her husband accountable not just for his actions, but for the quality and consistency of his artistic attention. This extraordinary document is a perfect reflection of the Mughal worldview at its most refined. The empire, though a formidable military power, was also a civilization that placed immense value on adab, a concept encompassing refinement, culture, and elegant behavior. Love in this context was not seen as a wild, untamable passion, but as the highest form of adab, a cultivated aesthetic experience to be nurtured with intention and skill. A successful marriage among the elite was expected to be a meeting of two cultivated sensibilities, a partnership that valued beauty, intelligence, and artistic expression as essential components of daily life. The Communal legally enforced this cultural ideal, ensuring that the business of marriage would always be attended by the arts of love. It recognized that language itself could be a binding force, that the right words, crafted with care and delivered with consistency, had the power to build a world of shared beauty and understanding that was stronger than any legal clause alone. This contract stands as a magnificent monument to the idea that true love is the greatest art form, and that its masterpieces are written not on paper, but on the human heart, one deliberate, tender verse at a time. After the Mughal emphasis on poetic declaration, we now enter a world where the most profound expressions of love were never meant to be spoken aloud. In the tightly regulated society of Edo period Japan around 1800 CE, under the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate, a samurai's life was governed by a strict code of honor, discipline, and unwavering self-control. In this environment, where every action and word was measured for its social consequence, the marriage contracts of the samurai class developed a unique and deeply subtle character. One such document, emerging from this context, contains a vow that seems almost like a whisper against the backdrop of history, yet it carries the weight of a solemn legal oath. The spouses pledge to listen to the unspoken heart, a phrase that elevates silent understanding to the highest form of marital duty. This was not a vague or poetic suggestion. It was a precise and demanding legal obligation. The contract required both husband and wife to become expert readers of each other's subtle, nonverbal language. It mandated an attunement to the slightest shift in demeanor, a fleeting glance that carried worry, a slight tension in the shoulders indicating stress, a quiet sigh that spoke volumes of unvoiced sorrow. In a culture that deeply valued public composure and emotional restraint, known as hakanai, the home was the one place where the mask could gently be set aside. This contract legally protected that sacred, private space by making each partner the guardian of the other's unspoken emotional world. the wife of a samurai who had to maintain her own impeccable composure while living with the constant fear of her husband dying in duty, was guaranteed the right to his silent empathy. In return, the samurai, burdened by the immense pressures of his station, was guaranteed a wife who could understand his needs without him having to break his stoic facade by articulating them. Their bond was to be a sanctuary of implicit understanding, where the most important conversations happened in the quiet space between words. The enforcement of this clause reveals just how seriously this quiet understanding was taken. A breach of this duty was not considered a minor personal failing. It was treated with a severity on par with financial neglect or public disrespect. If a spouse could demonstrate a persistent pattern of emotional ignorance, consistently missing clear nonverbal cues for comfort, willfully ignoring a partner's visible distress, or failing to offer support without being explicitly asked, it constituted a violation of their contract. In the tightly knit samurai districts where family honor was everything, such a breach would be brought before a council of family elders. The proceedings would not focus on loud arguments or dramatic accusations, but on a quiet, meticulous dissection of missed opportunities for connection. The offending spouse would be counseled on their lack of attentiveness and awareness, and their social standing within the community could be damaged by a reputation for emotional clumsiness. This legal framework recognized that in a world of strict silence and restraint, emotional abandonment could be a form of profound neglect, and the law moved to protect against it. This pact is a perfect reflection of the core Japanese cultural values of wa, or harmony, and ishin denshin, which translates as what the mind thinks the heart transmits. It embodies the belief that true intimacy does not require exhaustive verbal explanation. It flourishes in a state of mutual, intuitive understanding. Love in this context was not about grand declarations or passionate speeches. It was found in the silent act of placing a warm cup of tea before a weary partner without being asked. It was the intuitive understanding to give space when needed and to offer a gentle presence when it was most required. This contract formalizes the idea that the deepest love is often the most quiet, expressed not through what is said, but through what is thoughtfully and perceptively left unsaid. It reveals a sophisticated historical dimension of emotional contracts where the highest legal value was placed not on loud promises, but on the profound, respectful, and attentive silence that exists between two people who truly know each other's hearts. Beneath the soot-stained skies of industrial England, in the drawing rooms of upper-class Victorian society, love was undergoing a meticulous and paradoxical transformation. Here, in an era defined by rigid social codes and explosive industrial change, the marriage contract evolved into a document of exquisite emotional regulation. A settlement from 1850 reveals this startling complexity, embedding within its dense legal prose a clause that seems almost surreal to modern eyes. It legally obligated both spouses to provide demonstrative affection within bounds of propriety. This single, precise phrase captures the entire Victorian dilemma of the heart. Love was expected to be both passionately felt and impeccably restrained, a visible performance of devotion that never, ever threatened the polished surface of social decorum. The contract didn't just encourage affection, it legally mandated its display, but only within a very narrow and carefully prescribed lane of acceptable behavior. This was not a suggestion to be kind. It was a detailed rulebook for the performance of feeling, a legally binding guide on how to correctly love one's spouse. The bounds of propriety were explicitly defined by the elaborate social norms of the Victorian upper class. For a husband, demonstrative affection might mean presenting his wife with a bouquet of flowers on her birthday, escorting her arm in arm during their daily promenade in the park, or praising her domestic management in front of guests. For a wife, it could involve ensuring his study was properly quiet, dutifully listening to his accounts of the day, and maintaining a cheerful and agreeable demeanor in his presence. However, the same contract that required these displays also strictly forbade anything deemed excessive or vulgar. A husband's passion could not manifest as overly familiar public caresses or theatrical declarations of love that might cause embarrassment. A wife's affection could not stray into the territory of overt sexuality or demanding emotional intimacy that might distract her husband from his serious business in the world. Love had to be a quiet, reliable, and respectable engine of domestic harmony, never a disruptive or unseemly force. The enforcement of these emotional terms was as real as any financial penalty. A breach occurred not only through neglect, a husband who never offered a compliment, a wife who was perpetually sullen, but also through excessive or improper expression. If a spouse's behavior or lack thereof deviated from these unwritten but universally understood social codes, it could become a matter of legal consequence. In the most extreme cases, particularly among the aristocracy where vast fortunes and titles were at stake, a persistent failure to provide the correct type of affection could be grounds for a legal separation. A wife could petition the courts, arguing that her husband's coldness and public disrespect constituted a failure of his contractual duty to provide a demonstratively affectionate home environment. Conversely, a husband could allege that his wife's hysterical or overly emotional demands were a breach of her duty to maintain propriety, painting her as an unfit manager of his household and potentially jeopardizing her access to her children and social standing. The marriage settlement, therefore, became a weapon to police the boundaries of feeling, ensuring that love always served its primary purpose, reinforcing the strict class and gender hierarchies that ordered Victorian society. This contract is a perfect, if chilling, reflection of the Victorian ideal of love. It was a concept torn between the era's twin obsessions, the romantic, inward-looking focus on individual emotion, popularized by novels and poetry, and the overpowering public demand for social order, self-control, and strict conformity. Love was to be the anchor of the domestic sphere, that sanctuary from the heartless industrial world, but it was an anchor that had to be cast in precisely the right spot. The upper-class Victorian home was not a private haven. It was a stage constantly under the scrutiny of servants, family, and neighbors. Every gesture, every word was a performance of one's class and respectability. The regulated expressions of affection mandated by this contract were the scripts for that performance. They highlight love's powerful and often overlooked role as a primary tool for maintaining the social order, proving that the most effective way to control a society is not just to dictate what its people do, but to legally define how they are permitted to feel. Long before written words could capture a promise, the Cherokee people, like many indigenous nations across Turtle Island, understood that the most binding agreements were those spoken aloud before the community and the natural world. In a tradition stretching back centuries, a couple's marriage was formalized through a powerful oral contract, a set of vows that wove their lives together not just as a social unit, but as a sacred partnership with all of creation. The central pledge of this agreement was to walk the path of heart together, a phrase that holds a universe of meaning within its simple elegance. This was not a promise to walk the same physical path side by side, but a vow to synchronize their spiritual and emotional footsteps for the rest of their days, to ensure that as each grew and changed, they would do so in a way that honored and supported the other's journey. This oral contract was far from a casual promise. It was a legally binding covenant within Cherokee society, witnessed by elders, clan members, and the entire community. Its authority was derived from this collective witnessing. When the couple spoke their vows, they were entering into an agreement that everyone present was responsible for upholding. The community became the living parchment upon which this contract was written, and the elders served as its interpreters and enforcers. If one spouse began to stray from the path, acting in ways that caused emotional harm or spiritual neglect, the community did not see it as a private matter. The elders would intervene, offering counsel and guidance to help realign the individual with their vows. This system placed the health of the relationship at the center of communal well-being, treating a broken vow not as a personal failure, but as a tear in the social fabric that needed mending for the good of all. The profound depth of this contract is found in its holistic view of love, a perspective deeply rooted in a worldview that sees no separation between the spiritual, the human, and the natural realms. To walk the path of heart together meant to recognize that each person's emotional well-being was intimately connected to their spiritual health, and that both were dependent on living in right relationship with the environment. A marriage was therefore a covenant that extended far beyond the two people involved. It was a promise to the spiritual world and to the earth itself to create a harmonious life that would contribute positively to the balance of all things. Love was the active force that sustained this balance. A couple who loved well would naturally care for their family, their community, and their land with respect and gratitude, understanding that these were not separate responsibilities but different expressions of the same sacred principle. This ecological perspective on love offers a stunningly beautiful and radical insight into historical relationships, one that stands in stark contrast to the often individualistic and private concept of romance in the modern world. For the Cherokee, a successful marriage was measured not by personal happiness alone, but by its ability to generate harmony that rippled outward, strengthening the clan and honoring the natural world. A couple's love was seen as a life-sustaining force, as vital and necessary as clean water or fertile soil. This contract demonstrates that for many indigenous cultures, love was the original renewable resource. The more it was cultivated and shared within a relationship, the more it nourished everything and everyone around it. This timeless wisdom embedded in an oral vow challenges us to expand our own understanding of commitment, to see it not as a wall that protects a private happiness, but as a wellspring that feeds the whole world. Now we turn to a tradition that beautifully redefines the very scale of a loving partnership, moving it far beyond two individuals to encompass an entire network of kin and community. In Zulu culture, the practice of lobola, often translated as bride wealth, is frequently misunderstood by outsiders as a simple purchase price for a wife. But to view it through that narrow economic lens is to miss its profound emotional and social depth entirely. A traditional lobola negotiation was, in fact, an intricate and binding contract between two families, a pact where the exchange of cattle or other valuables was merely the tangible symbol of a much deeper, more important exchange of respect, responsibility, and heartfelt commitment. While the economic element was undeniably central, the agreement was powerfully underpinned by unspoken but universally understood expectations of emotional respect and the seamless integration of the bride into her new extended family, transforming the concept of love into a community-wide project. The negotiation process itself was a meticulous ritual designed to assess far more than just wealth. As elders from the groom's family engaged with elders from the bride's, they were carefully evaluating character, temperament, and the potential for long-term harmony. The discussions were not a haggling session over a price, but a thoughtful dialogue about the future well-being of the couple and the merging of their familial lines. When an agreement was finally reached and the cattle were transferred, they were not a payment. They were a pledge, a solemn guarantee from the groom's family that they would honor, protect, and cherish the woman who was leaving her own home to join theirs. This act created a powerful web of reciprocal obligation. The bride's family was assured of her treatment, while the groom's family gained not just a new member, but a vital link to another lineage, strengthening the social fabric of the entire community. The lobola contract made the health and happiness of the marriage a matter of direct concern to both families, giving them a vested interest in providing ongoing support, counsel, and mediation throughout the couple's life together. Within this framework, emotional neglect was not a private marital issue. It was a serious breach of this communal contract. If a husband was consistently cold, disrespectful, or failed to provide emotional care for his wife, she was not without recourse. Her family, who had witnessed and agreed to the lobola terms, could and would intervene. They could approach his family elders to discuss the problem, reminding them of their responsibilities and the promises implicit in the original agreement. This system of communal oversight provided a powerful check against mistreatment, ensuring that a woman's emotional well-being was safeguarded by the collective weight of two families, not just the whims of one man. The love between the couple was therefore nurtured and protected by this wider safety net, understood to be essential for the stability and prosperity of the entire extended household. This practice is a stunning embodiment of the African philosophy of Ubuntu, often translated as "I am because we are." This worldview fundamentally rejects the Western notion of the individual as a solitary, self-contained unit. Instead, it posits that our humanity is realized through our relationships with others. In the context of marriage, this means love cannot be separated from social and economic life. It is the invisible glue that binds them all together. A successful marriage was one that created harmony not only between two people but between two families, fostering unity and mutual support that benefited everyone. The Lobola Pact institutionalized this principle of reciprocal relationships, making love a practical, active force that built stronger clans and more resilient communities. This communal framework offers a powerful challenge to our modern, hyper-individualistic view of romance, presenting a compelling vision where love is not a private fortress but a shared garden, tended to by many hands for the benefit of all. While the Victorian elite were meticulously regulating affection within the bounds of propriety, a very different kind of agreement was being quietly signed in meeting houses across the young United States. In 1820 America, a nation still defining its own laws and social structures, the Quakers presented a radical alternative to the patriarchal norms of the day. Their marriage covenant was not a document drafted by lawyers or overseen by the state, but a sacred agreement made before God and their community, and its central vow would have been unthinkable in most other contemporary contracts. The couple pledged to cherish each other's inner light, a phrase that captures the breathtakingly egalitarian and spiritual heart of Quaker philosophy. This was far more than a promise to be kind. It was a legally binding commitment to actively nurture the divine spark residing within each individual, to support the unique spiritual and emotional journey of one's partner as the highest calling of the marriage itself. This profound obligation was rooted in the core Quaker belief that every single person, regardless of gender, possesses this direct, unmediated connection to the divine, this inner light or that of God within. Therefore, a marriage between two such individuals could not be a hierarchy. The contract explicitly framed the union as a divine partnership of absolute equals. It granted both the husband and the wife an equal voice in defining the emotional and spiritual terms of their life together. There was no head of the household with ultimate authority. Major decisions required mutual consent, arrived at through patient, prayerful discernment together. This was a staggering departure from the legal doctrine of coverture, common at the time, which effectively erased a woman's legal identity upon marriage, merging it with her husband's. In the Quaker meeting house, a wife was not her husband's subordinate. She was his spiritual equal, his partner in revelation, and the co-author of their shared covenant. The enforcement of this agreement was as unique as its terms. There was no external court to appeal to for breaches of emotional or spiritual neglect. Instead, the entire Quaker community acted as both witness and arbiter. The marriage contract was read aloud during the wedding ceremony, which was itself a silent meeting for worship where the couple would rise and speak their vows when moved by the Spirit. This public declaration made the entire congregation responsible for upholding the covenant. If a husband was domineering, if he stifled his wife's spiritual growth or dismissed her conscience, it wasn't a private matter. The community elders, including respected female ministers, would step in to provide counsel and mediation, guiding the couple back to their foundational promise of mutual reverence. The primary penalty for neglect was not a fine, but a loss of standing within this close-knit spiritual family, a consequence that carried immense weight in a society built on communal integrity and shared witness. This remarkable contract demonstrates a historical path not taken by the mainstream, a vision of love framed not by external law or social conformity, but by an internal, sacred compass. It shows that even in an era of entrenched patriarchy, there were communities actively building models of marriage based on radical equality and spiritual friendship. The Quakers understood that true love required more than sentiment. It demanded a disciplined and daily reverence for the inviolable sanctity of the other person's soul. Their covenant challenges us to consider that the most enduring partnerships are those where both people feel seen not for their roles, but for their deepest selves, and are cherished not for what they provide, but for the divine light they carry within. As the world emerged from the shadow of the First World War, a profound shift in the very architecture of relationships began to take hold in Western societies. The Roaring Twenties weren't just about jazz and flappers. They were the birthplace of a revolutionary new ideal for marriage, one that found its way, remarkably, into the fine print of legal documents. This new model was called Companionate marriage, and it represented a clean break from thousands of years of precedent. For the first time, the primary purpose of the union was officially redefined. It was no longer primarily about building economic stability, securing social status, or producing legitimate heirs. The central, legally articulated purpose became emotional companionship. The marriage was now a partnership of friends, a meeting of minds and hearts where mutual happiness was not just a hopeful byproduct, but the entire point of the endeavor. This seismic shift was captured in contracts that began to include clauses that would have seemed frivolous or bizarre just a generation earlier. Legal phrases like the pursuit of mutual happiness and the duty of emotional fulfillment were formally typed onto official letterhead. These weren't vague, unenforceable aspirations tucked away in a romantic preamble. They were core components of the agreement, as substantive as any financial clause. The most groundbreaking innovation was the direct link these contracts established between emotional neglect and legal recourse. They explicitly provided options for divorce, a dissolution of the marriage not on the traditional grounds of adultery or abandonment, but on the startlingly modern grounds of irreconcilable differences or a simple, profound failure to provide companionship and happiness. This was nothing short of a legal revolution. It meant that a wife could now potentially leave a marriage because her husband was boring, emotionally distant, or simply a bad friend, and the court would recognize her unhappiness as a valid reason to terminate the contract. The subjective, internal world of feeling had finally become a matter of legitimate legal concern. This dramatic change didn't happen in a vacuum. It was propelled by a perfect storm of social and economic forces. The trauma of the war had accelerated a sense that life was short and personal happiness was paramount. The women's suffrage movement had secured the vote, granting women a new political voice and a growing sense of autonomy that they began to demand in their private lives. New access to birth control gave couples, for the first time in history, reliable control over reproduction, allowing them to uncouple sex from procreation and prioritize pleasure and emotional intimacy. Psychology was emerging as a field, popularizing the idea that emotional well-being was a crucial component of a healthy life. All of these currents flowed together, creating a culture that was ready to believe that a marriage should first and foremost be a source of personal satisfaction and deep friendship. The Companionate marriage agreement, therefore, stands as the direct bridge between the historical contracts we've explored and our modern understanding of relationships. It marks the final, decisive turn toward the idea that love, defined as intimacy, friendship, and emotional fulfillment, is the central and essential reason for two people to marry. This legal evolution set the stage for everything that followed, from no-fault divorce laws to the contemporary emphasis on a partner being your best friend. It completed a journey that began with ancient Sumerian vows of mutual support, transforming the legal concept of marriage from a practical alliance for survival into a personal pact for happiness, a transition that continues to shape our deepest expectations of love and commitment to this very day. What emerges most powerfully from this extraordinary collection of 29 agreements is a truth that turns our modern assumptions completely upside down. For our ancestors, love was not some fleeting, invisible feeling to be whispered about in private. It was a tangible, active force in the world, a force so vital to the health of the individual, the family, and the entire community that it was deemed worthy of the law's most serious attention and protection. These contracts reveal a world view where the inner landscape of the heart was not separate from the outer structures of society. In fact, the stability of those structures was believed to depend directly on the careful tending of that emotional world. A husband's emotional neglect wasn't just a personal failing. It was a threat to the household's economic productivity. A wife's loneliness wasn't just her private sorrow. It was a crack in the foundation of the social order. This is why these documents exist. They represent a conscious cross-cultural effort to codify care, to legislate joy, and to make respect a legally enforceable standard. This idea of love as something actionable is perhaps the most striking thread running through all these diverse cultures. Love, in these legal frameworks, is not a noun describing a feeling. It is a verb, a series of specific, demonstrable behaviors. It is the Sumerian couple's duty to provide comfort in times of sorrow. It is the Babylonian merchant's obligation to listen to his wife's heart's words. It is the Tang Dynasty noble's requirement to compose an original poem. It is the Victorian husband's mandated demonstration of affection within strict bounds of propriety. In every case, love is something you do, not just something you feel. And crucially, the failure to perform these actions, this emotional labor, carried real, often financial, consequences. This challenges our contemporary romantic ideal that love should be effortless and spontaneous. These ancient societies, in their profound wisdom, understood that the things that matter most require intentional effort, and that sometimes effort requires the structure and motivation of a binding promise. Yet for all this common ground, the beautiful diversity of these contracts shows us that there is no single, universal way to legally express love. Each culture defined and enforced it through the distinct lens of its own values and priorities. For the practical-minded Assyrians, love was a budget line item for feasts and festivals. Joy was something you actively funded. For the spiritually ambitious Gupta Indians, love was a shared meditation on each other's happiness, a daily practice of focused intention. For the stoic samurai of Edo, Japan, love was the quiet, intense discipline of listening to the unspoken heart. Some, like the Byzantines, framed love as the provision of emotional safety, a sanctuary from the world. Others, like the Nabataeans, saw it as the courageous sharing of solace under the desert stars. This spectacular variety proves that the human desire to secure love is a constant, but the methods for doing so are wonderfully, creatively infinite, reflecting everything from a society's economic base to its highest philosophical ideals. Ultimately, this drive to make love accountable speaks to a deep and enduring human longing. We have always yearned for our most important promises to be more than just words on the wind. We have sought to etch them into clay, ink them onto papyrus, and seal them with the signatures of witnesses and the approval of judges. This impulse to formalize love reveals a fundamental understanding that the heart is both powerful and fragile. It needs protection, it needs structure, it needs the weight of a covenant to give it shape and endurance against the erosion of time, stress, and human forgetfulness. These 29 contracts are not quaint historical curiosities. They are a mirror held up to our own deepest needs, reminding us that across thousands of years and miles, we have always shared the same hope, to find a way to make the most beautiful promise of the human heart also one of its most keepable. From the meticulous Sumerian vows etched in clay to the emotionally nuanced Companionate marriage agreements of the 1920s, these 29 extraordinary documents collectively reveal a truth that rewrites our entire understanding of history's heart. We often picture the past as a colder, harder place where matters of emotion were secondary to survival and strategy, but these contracts pull back the curtain on a far more complex and beautiful reality. They show us with undeniable clarity that love was never just a private, fleeting feeling to be whispered in the shadows. For our ancestors, it was an active, formidable force in the world, a power so essential to the stability of the household, the prosperity of the community, and the very order of society that it was deemed worthy of the law's most serious protection and recognition. A husband's emotional neglect wasn't merely a personal failing. It was a breach of contract, a threat to the economic and social unit. A wife's loneliness wasn't just her private sorrow. It was a crack in the foundation that the community had a vested interest in repairing. This is why these documents were created with such painstaking care. They represent a profound, cross-cultural endeavor to codify care, to legislate joy, and to make heartfelt respect a legally enforceable standard. This concept of love as something actionable is perhaps the most vital thread woven through all these diverse cultures and centuries. In these legal frameworks, love is not a noun describing a passive state of being. It is a verb, a continuous series of specific, demonstrable behaviors that require conscious effort and daily renewal. It is the Babylonian merchant's sworn duty to listen to his wife's heart's words and act upon them. It is the Tang Dynasty noble's contractual obligation to compose an original poem that captures the unique essence of his partner's spirit. It is the Assyrian officer's mandated allocation of household funds specifically for feasts and festivals designed to create shared happiness. In every single case, love is defined not by what one feels, but by what one consistently does. And crucially, the failure to perform these actions, this essential emotional labor, carried real, tangible consequences, from financial penalties and social shaming to the unprecedented right to seek separation or annulment. This stands in stark contrast to our modern romantic ideal that true love should be effortless and spontaneous. These ancient societies, in their collective wisdom, understood that the things which matter most in life require intentional, sustained effort, and that sometimes the most beautiful promises need the sturdy framework of a covenant to give them the strength to endure the tests of time and human nature. What is equally breathtaking is the spectacular diversity of expression this universal impulse took. There is no single, monolithic way to legally express love. Each culture defined and enforced it through the distinct lens of its own deepest values and most pressing survival needs. For the Nabataean traders facing the vast emptiness of the desert, love was legally mandated companionship under the stars, a pact to share stories and solace to ward off the existential threat of isolation. For the spiritually ambitious Gupta Indians, love was a shared meditation on each other's happiness, a daily practice of focused intention aimed at mutual enlightenment. The Stoic samurai of Edo, Japan framed love as the quiet, intense discipline of listening to the unspoken heart, valuing silent understanding above all else. This incredible variety proves a beautiful point. The human desire to secure and protect love is a profound constant across humanity, but the methods for doing so are wonderfully, creatively infinite, reflecting everything from a society's economic structure to its highest philosophical and spiritual ideals. Ultimately, this deep-seated drive to make love accountable speaks to a timeless human longing. We have always yearned for our most sacred promises to be more than just words vanishing on the wind. We have sought to etch them into clay, ink them onto papyrus, and seal them with the signatures of witnesses, the approval of judges, and the blessing of the community. This ancient impulse to formalize love reveals a fundamental understanding that the heart is both the most powerful and the most fragile thing we possess. It needs protection, it needs structure, it needs the weight of a covenant to give its promises the shape and endurance to survive the inevitable storms of life. These 29 contracts are far more than historical curiosities. They are a mirror held up to our own deepest needs and aspirations. They challenge us to look at our own relationships and ask ourselves, how do we actively protect the love we have? How do we make our own promises more substantial, more tangible, and more enduring? They remind us that across thousands of years and thousands of miles, we have always shared the same beautiful, hopeful goal: to find a way to make the most important promise of the human heart also one of its most keepable. So what do you think? Did any of these ancient agreements strike a particular chord with you? I'd genuinely love to hear which contract surprised you the most. Was it the Babylonian merchant fined for not listening to his wife's heart? Or perhaps the Tang Dynasty couple legally required to write each other poetry? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going about how these historical perspectives might even influence our own relationships today. If this journey through the heartfelt side of legal history resonated with you, showing your support is incredibly meaningful. A like on this video and a subscription to the channel truly helps make more deep dives like this possible. Be sure to hit that bell icon as well so you won't miss our next adventure into the past, where we'll continue to uncover the hidden stories and surprising connections that define our shared humanity. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for spending this time exploring these timeless covenants with me. It's a powerful reminder that our desire to protect, honor, and legally safeguard the ones we love is a story as old as civilization itself.